When I was a really little kid, this local small amusement park that used to be open by us would hold this annual event called Pumpkin Land, which was held on the Saturday before Halloween, where candies would be given out to kids in between rides, and pumpkins would be scattered throughout the park for families to pick up and take home before leaving. I always looked forward to it, and this one particular year when I was 7, we were going right after my soccer game. The park also rewarded kids for coming in costumes, so I was going in my cliche Scream costume. Anyway, my parents took my 2 siblings and I, and when we got there, my brothers begged to go on the haunted house ride first, and then the roller coasters. Basically, they wanted to do the most thrilling rides first. Anyway, my mom and 2 brothers got in one of the cars for the haunted house ride. Since they only seated 4, my dad stayed with me on the line so we could ride together. And I think as I started to get cold feet, I felt like I needed to use the bathroom. So we got off the line, and my dad led us to the bathroom. He went too, but I finished first, so I waited outside the bathroom. I waited for a while. I was kind of confused. Eventually I went back to the bathroom, and my dad wasn't in there. That's when I started to panic. I was alone in a huge crowd of people, and at 7 years old I was actually scared of being lost. Eventually a man came up to me and asked where my parents were. I told him I couldn't find my dad, and I asked him for help. He took my hand and said, "We're gonna go find them." I remember him leading me with a tight grip of my hand, and suddenly he pulled out his archaic Nokia brick cell phone and started talking to someone on the other end. The only major thing I remember him saying was, "Oh, I'm with him right now," as he looked down at me and smiled. Then he said, "Okay," and hung up. He looked at me again and said that was my dad, and that he was waiting by the parking lot. He continued to lead me, but even at 7 years old, I wasn't an idiot. I was wise to the fact that my dad did not have a cell phone, and that this stranger probably didn't know my dad. How would he even know who I was if I was under a Scream mask? As we were approaching the front gates of the park, I spotted a female employee and started saying "excuse me" over and over until I got her attention. Then I said, "I don't know him, please help." The man defended himself, saying he knew my dad and was trying to get me to him, but the employee took my side and asked me to come stand by her so she could use the loudspeaker to find my parents. The man didn't stay a second longer after that. He walked away quickly into the parking lot. The employee announced over the park intercoms that a child in a Scream costume was missing his parents and gave my name. Eventually my dad came running over, waving his hands. He was a nervous wreck. The employee told him of the potential predator and the possible attempted kidnapping, and that's when he lost it. When my mom came over, she was just as furious. My parents asked the manager to see the surveillance footage. Somehow at that time, the amusement park didn't have any surveillance cameras, according to the manager. Still, my parents thanked that employee for getting me away from that man, and we tried to have a normal day after that. I was too young to realize the severity of the potential situation I had just avoided. Obviously, remembering it as an adult is a lot more sickening to think about. When my mom and stepdad went on their honeymoon, I wasn't trusted to watch the house for the week, so they sent me to my Uncle Ronnie's farm. He lives with my Aunt Susie and my cousin Ronnie Jr. They have a spare bedroom upstairs that I stayed in. It's an old-fashioned style wooden farmhouse. It's big and nice though. The spare bedroom overlooked the crops and the numerous scarecrows my uncle had scattered through the crops. This was in mid-October a few years ago, and my uncle was mid-harvesting his corn at this time of the month. He asked for my and Junior's help. Weirdly, it wasn't tedious work, like I kind of enjoyed doing it. He wasn't using his combine. Instead, we were just hand-picking a bunch of corn. I had this little rolling basket-like thing that I was supposed to fill up. I admired the 3 scarecrows he had. They looked like he put a lot of work into them. They had sweatpants on and varying flannels, along with straw hats over their heads. When we were done picking the corn, I asked Uncle Ronnie how long it took to make those. He said a few hours at most, and he said they really do the trick keeping the crows away for the most part. That night after dinner, I played video games and smoked weed with Junior for a little bit. Then I just went to the guest room to do whatever on my laptop. Next thing I knew, a rock or something hit the window. It scared me for sure, as there's no way that wasn't intentional. I didn't want to go look out the window to check though. I just closed my laptop screen so there would be total darkness in the room. I crossed my fingers it wouldn't happen again, but when a second rock hit the window, my heart felt like it dropped out of an airplane. The room was still completely dark, so I gave it a minute before getting up to peek out the window. There was a full moon out, and one of the outside lights was on, both lighting up a decent amount of the crops and one of the scarecrows. I continued to look around, but when I saw something moving in the corner of my eye, I looked back at the scarecrow to see one of its arms waving at me. No, surely I was hallucinating. The waving stopped, and the arm moved back down to its side. I shut the blind and wanted to throw up. I ran to Junior's room and opened the door, but by this point in the night, he was already asleep. I closed his door and checked downstairs for my aunt and uncle, but all the lights were off downstairs, so I checked their bedroom, and they too were both asleep. I went back to my room and lifted the blind just enough to peek out there. The light outside was now off, but with the bright moonlight, I was able to see the scarecrow was still hung up on the stick. I looked out that window for over a minute, waiting for it to move again, but the longer I waited, the more I realized I must have been higher than I realized. I finally dropped the blind back down and climbed into bed. The next morning, I went downstairs to my Aunt Susie making us all pancakes. My uncle was already outside doing work. Aunt Susie called Junior down to eat before all the pancakes were gone, and around that same time, my uncle stormed into the house asking, "Where did the goddamn scarecrows go?" My heart dropped. The three of us went outside, my uncle leading us to show us that all three scarecrows were missing from their posts. That's when I told him about what I saw last night, and how at first I thought I just imagined it, but now it made sense. The nightmarish realization hit me that somebody did in fact throw rocks in my window. They did see me looking out, and someone was posing as a scarecrow. That night when we were all sleeping, the doorbell rang continuously at like 1 or 2 in the morning. I heard my uncle and Junior yelling in the hallway and running down the stairs, so I followed. When he opened the front door, the 3 scarecrows were posted up right in front of the porch, all with red paint stains covering them, mimicking blood. My uncle called the police and turned on all the outside lights on the property. The police, as well as my uncle, chalked it up to some stupid early Halloween prank by a bunch of immature kids. But the possibility that it wasn't, and that it may have been a much more hostile motive behind this, is what really freaked me out. It was November. All the leaves were varying shades of yellow and orange, my favorite time of year to visit the countryside. I was with my girlfriend at her dad's upstate home, which was usually used as a summer home, but the two of us came up there to go camping in the nearby woods. The home had all the needed camping supplies, including the tent, so we parked there and took the camping stuff into the woods. Why? Just the experience of camping and sleeping in the woods, I guess. I've only been camping a few times in my life, but I liked camping in the fall because there's less bugs and of course you can't beat the foliage. We were camped out in a small circular clearing, just big enough for our tent and campfire. We sat around the fire for about an hour, eating and just talking. Then we went inside the tent. We kept the fire going as it made my girlfriend feel safer, and it added a bit of warmth. Besides the sound of the crackling fire, we eventually started hearing leaves crunching in the distance. My girlfriend and I looked at each other. She put her finger up to her lip. I could tell she was nervous. Fires usually repel wildlife from approaching, so as the crunching of the leaves got louder, it got more suspicious. The footsteps also sounded bipedal, like a human's footsteps. The crunches got louder until they stopped around the fire. Then we noticed the shadow outline of someone standing out there, and then they sat down on one of the chairs, but they didn't say a word. So I finally decided I was going to peek my head out and check. I looked out to the campfire, expecting to see someone sitting on one of the chairs, but there was no one out there. I got up on my legs to look around the campsite, into the trees and darkness. I didn't see anyone out there. My girlfriend was whispering something. It sounded like she was urgently trying to get my attention. So I crawled back inside, and she said, "What does he want?" I replied, "There's no one there." She replied, "What are you talking about? I see him in the chair right now." I looked at the wall of the tent and saw the shadow outline of the person still sitting in the chair by the fire. I realized that was impossible, though. I crawled back out of the tent to look one more time, and both the chairs were still empty. I went back inside and said to my girlfriend, "We need to go right now." She didn't ask questions. She got straight up, took my hand, and followed me out of the tent. When she saw there was no one sitting in the chair, she screamed. I yelled at her to shut up, and I led us through the near total darkness in the direction back to the mobile home. While running, we heard this horrible groaning sound not too far away from us, and one single loud crash of a tree branch or something. This caused both of us to scream, "Oh shit," and run even faster. How we found the property was by repeatedly pressing the car lock button until we finally heard the car horn. We went into the mobile home, locked the door, and hid under the covers in the safety of the bedroom. Still, I didn't feel entirely safe being surrounded by nothing but woods in every direction, and I was paranoid that whatever was out there followed us. I let my girlfriend sleep while I stayed up listening for sounds. I thought I heard a clicking or something from the front door to the home, but that might have been my paranoia playing tricks on me. I fell asleep eventually, and when we woke up, we went back for the tent and supplies, scared shitless while doing so. Nothing was moved except for the one chair we thought we saw the shadow sitting in. It was knocked over. We hurried back to the car, drove home, and that was our last camping adventure. Halloween used to be one of my favorite holidays. Now I kinda just enjoy it when I have a decent party to go to. In 2018, when I was a senior in college, my friend Tracy's sorority was going to be throwing a big Halloween party at the sorority house. She said I could bring one friend since they didn't want too many outsiders at the party, so I invited my best friend Cody. We're very last minute people when it comes to Halloween costumes. The party was that night and we didn't have anything. Cody was working late, so he'd have to meet me right before the party, so he asked me to get a costume for him and he'd just Venmo me the money. I ran to the nearby Spirit Halloween store that opened up like 5 minutes from my house. I was just shotgunning it. I picked a Where's Waldo costume for myself and a Superman costume for Cody, both two of the cheaper costumes they had. Everything was normal until I got to the cashier. I was on the phone with Cody telling him about the costume I got him and giving him details about the party. I told him which sorority it was, that Tracy got us the invite, gave him the address, and then he convinced me to pick him up instead of us just meeting, stuff like that. All of this was said as the cashier was watching me. He was some guy who was decently older than me, but because of his receding hairline, I couldn't put a gauge on it as to whether he was in his 30s or low 40s. He wore glasses though, and had a skinny-ish build and an awkward presence. As he rang up the two costumes, he had a comment something along the lines of, "Sounds like you have a fun party tonight, huh?" I chuckled and said yeah. Then he started asking more details, like if it's open invite, and had a comment about there being lots of girls. I said it's closed invite and that I barely got an invite. He said it's all good. Then he shook my hand and introduced himself as Mike, so I did the same and told him my name was Sean, and I left. It was weird. Fast forward to later that night. I picked up Cody and we arrived to the party around 10 p.m. It sounded loud inside, and there were multiple groups of people entering the house before us. At the door, a girl asked us who we knew there, and I told her Tracy. She let us in, and we were in this huge living room area. Music blasting, all the lights dimmed low, Halloween decorations everywhere, and to top it off, people with red cups full of booze crowding the place. We saw Tracy and hung around her for a while. We played beer pong and other drinking games. It was a very legit party. But then, at some point, there was a commotion by the front door area. Cody, Tracy, and I and a few others walked over, and the girl at the door started calling out, "Where's Tracy?" She came forward, and the girl asked, "Who is Sean?" I said, "I am." Then she asked me who that creepy guy we invited was. I was confused and said, "Who?" She described some older-looking man in a cowboy costume with a fake mustache. He apparently inappropriately touched one of the girls trying to get her into a separate room, and she screamed for help. Then he took off with something in his pocket. None of the guys chased after him or anything. Immediately, I thought of the cashier from Spirit Halloween. I told them about it, and everyone got even more creeped out. The party went on, but they were a lot more cautious about who they were letting in, and they even considered calling the cops for a second. That whole thing really killed my vibe, and we didn't stay much longer after that. In total, we were probably at the party for a couple hours at most. We left a little past midnight, I think. I didn't drink much. As I started my car, the car parked like 2 cars behind us also turned on, and as I drove in the direction of Cody's house, the car started to follow. Cody and I were sure it had to be him after it made 4 of the same turns, so I pulled to the side of the road, egging him on to pull over, but the car just stopped for a few seconds, then basically floored it past us. We didn't get a good look at who was inside, but I'm still positive it was him. After dropping off Cody down the block from his house, just being cautious, I was staying very aware of my surroundings, and because of that, I noticed a car in the near distance with its lights off, tailing me. It looked like the same car. I got to a main road, once again pulled over and waited. The car once again waited, and then a few seconds later turned on its lights and floored it in the far left lane, passing me. I was obviously shook, and drove home as fast as I could while I was sure I wasn't being followed. I called that Spirit Halloween location the next day and reported the cashier. They thanked me for the information, but I never went back there, so I wouldn't know if he was fired or anything. Looking back, I wonder if I could have and should have pressed charges. Regardless, I have no idea what he could have possibly wanted from me, but either way, I'm happy he didn't find out where I live. Halloween of 2019 was the most terrifying night of my life. I live in Australia, and because we don't celebrate Halloween as enthusiastically, we don't get as many trick-or-treaters, around 5 or 6 people at most. I am personally a huge fan of Halloween though, to the dismay of my parents who would prefer not to acknowledge it. Obviously that leaves me in charge of putting up decorations and handing out candy. This particular year, Halloween fell on a school night and a storm began just after 6 o'clock, which unfortunately meant my efforts preparing the decorations had pretty much gone to waste. Ignoring my better judgment, I still waited for trick-or-treaters in the living room and watched The Conjuring to pass the time. Around an hour and a half later, I got a message from my friend M on our group chat, asking if anyone would like to mess around and go trick-or-treating. At first I was confused. We hadn't gone trick-or-treating in over 5 years, but I decided it would make the night more enjoyable as nobody was knocking on the door anyway. My other friends, who I'll call S, C, and H, all agreed and asked M where we should meet up. M quickly replied he couldn't make it, which was strange because he was the one who offered to go trick-or-treating, but he suggested a house which has lots of candy. Me, S, C, and H all arrived at the house within half an hour. A large table with a pumpkin bowl filled with lollipops stood at the front porch, and after checking the windows to make sure we weren't being watched, we emptied the bowl between us, only leaving a few to avoid suspicion. As we turned around to leave, we were greeted by 2 men dressed as clowns approaching us up the driveway. They had huge painted smiles and tilted heads. I could tell we were all creeped out, and one of my friends screamed as they started bolting towards us, one squeaking its rubber nose as they chased. After running for what felt like an eternity, we finally lost them. We decided to go to M's house so we could discuss what just happened in a safe area. However, when M answered the door, he burst into laughter. "What the hell are you guys doing?" he said, confused. "You told us to go trick-or-treating. Can you just let us inside?" S replied. After sitting down on M's couch, we all soon realized M had lost his phone earlier that day, and a stranger had suggested the idea of going to that house, presumably some sort of trap from the clowns. After another half hour, I cautiously made it home by 9:30, finished my movie, and went outside to collect the candy bowl I set up. I was shocked to see the bowl was completely empty. However, my stomach turned when I saw a clown nose was now laying inside of it. I told my parents everything that happened, and showed them the clown nose that had been left at our house. They assured me it was just some Halloween prank. I woke up around 1 a.m. to noises coming from my bedroom window, like rocks hitting the glass. Although I was scared half to death, my curiosity got the better of me. I eventually opened the blinds. My Halloween decorations were destroyed and littered the ground below. I stared motionless in complete shock, until a lollipop was thrown at the window, breaking my trance. I looked up and saw them, the two clowns perched upon the neighbor's roof looking down at me. I screamed and ran away towards my parents' room. I'll skip the details that followed, but the police were called and the clowns were not found. The officers informed us they would check out the house my friends and I trick-or-treated at, and they left in about half an hour. The following morning, we were told the house was abandoned, and M's phone was discovered inside. That day at school, I learned M, S, C, and H all had creepy experiences during the night as well. I'm not sure if the clowns followed us home or they somehow tracked us through M's phone. All I know is that Halloween is only a few weeks away, and I am completely terrified they'll return. It was a stormy Halloween night. I was with my three friends John, Mary, and Keenan. Since we didn't have any real plans and were kind of just hanging around, I decided to grab the Ouija board from my closet. All my friends were down to try it. I wanted to be funny but also set the mood, so I got 3 candles, lit them, and turned off all the lights. The 4 of us sat at the table with our hands on the planchette. We started off by saying, "Is anyone there?" Of course, the planchette started to move, and we all started to laugh. It went from Y to E to S, spelling yes. John and I began asking the really stupid, goofy questions, like, "Will you haunt Mary?" And she kept begging us to stop. But as the planchette moved to once again spell out the word yes, we all erupted into laughter. To be honest, I didn't even contribute to moving the piece around the board. I just assumed John and Keenan were messing around for the most part. Then, without anyone asking a question, the planchette started moving to spell the words, "I'm inside the house." More laughs, until there was a huge, very obvious thump sound from directly upstairs, like right over our heads. It most closely resembled a boot stomping on the floor. All of us jumped. Mary started screaming and freaking out. John, Keenan, and I didn't know whether to laugh or be freaked out. My parents weren't home. No one was except for me. We don't have any pets. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. We looked at each other. Then I went to look through the peephole. I opened the door. It was a dad and his young son trick-or-treating under an umbrella. I opened the door and handed the kids some candies. But once I shut the door, it was back to the current reality of the situation, which was figuring out what the hell that sound was. I convinced all 3 of them to come upstairs with me just to check. We all got to the upstairs hallway. All that was on was a nightlight plugged into the floor outlet. We were halfway through the hallway, approaching my parents' bedroom, which was the room directly above the table we were sitting at, where we heard the noise. That's when we all heard the same thing. It was this voice of a girl. What was said, none of us could hear it, but all 4 of us agreed we heard the voice of a girl in my parents' room, followed by the sound of something being dropped on the floor. Mary and Keenan ran down the stairs, freaked out, but not making a peep. John and I, however, approached the door. I opened it quietly and pushed it open slowly. I looked into the dark room, and I saw something tall standing in the far corner of the room. I slammed the door shut and we ran down the stairs. We stayed in the living room and flicked on the lights, and then noticed one of the candles by the Ouija board was blown out. I called the cops, and a few minutes later, when an officer arrived, I asked him to check my parents' bedroom. I led him up the stairs and pointed at the door. He knocked on it and announced police, then opened the door quickly and flicked on the light. He checked the closet, under the bed, nothing. That's when we followed and entered the room as well, and I can confirm no one was in there. While we were at it, we checked every single bedroom and bathroom up there. There was not a single possible place anybody could be hiding. After the police officer left, we threw the Ouija board in the neighbor's garbage, and we all sat under the awning in my backyard, listening to the storm in silence until my parents returned. After telling the story to my parents together, eventually my friends left. My parents seemed to believe us, but what could they really do? I didn't sleep too well that night, and obviously I have no plans of using a Ouija board ever again. I live in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. It was a Tuesday night. I was laying on my bed trying to get some sleep. I laid there for about 3 hours until I decided to get up and take a walk around my neighborhood just to clear my head. It was 2 in the morning. I was walking down the street when I remembered there's an abandoned building in our neighborhood. I decided to visit it. People say that this building is haunted, and I've always wanted to see what's inside of it. The building itself looked really creepy. Broken windows, a huge metal door which said no entry with red paint. As an 18-year-old college student, I wanted to be adventurous. I climbed through one of the broken windows and got inside the building. I took out my phone and started to record so I could show off in front of my friends. Just to let you guys know, my phone works completely fine. There's no problem with it. The place was really dark. The only source of light in that building was from my phone. It took me a couple of seconds to realize I was inside a small room. I walked out the door into the hallway. It was an apartment. I was doing commentary while recording to make it look cool. I got out of the apartment and into the main hall of the building. Here's a picture of the main hall. On the left side of the elevator, there's a small passageway which leads to a really small room under the stairs, as seen in this picture. I went there to investigate. When I got close to the room, I heard a clicking noise from the first door. I was frozen for a split second. I walked back to the main hall still recording. Then I heard a loud sound of metal dropping on concrete. I almost crapped my pants. I wanted to get the hell out of there, but something inside me told me to go upstairs and find out what it was. I started walking up the stairs as slowly as I could. I don't even know what I was expecting to see up there. I got to the first floor. As usual, it was dark, but it got colder. This event took place in the middle of August, so it was hot outside. I'm into paranormal stuff, and when I suddenly felt cold, I firmly believed something was going on here. I should have turned back, but I still wanted to see where that sound came from. There were 4 apartments on each floor. I investigated all 4 of them and saw nothing. A chill ran down my spine when I realized the whole second floor and the ground floor were covered in sand. There was no concrete and no sign of anything metal. The cold temperature on the floor and the fact that I was alone gave me the chills. I hurried down the stairs, made my way back to the apartment, climbed out through the window, and ran back to my home. When I got home, I drank gallons of water, calmed myself down, and took out my phone. I wanted to hear that sound again, so I played the video, and to my horror, the audio on the video was messed up. My commentary wasn't there at all. Like I said earlier, there's no problem with my phone. It works fine. I didn't get any sleep that night. I told my friends about it, and they told me that it was really stupid to go inside that building alone. I didn't delete the video. I decided to keep it as a memory. Fast forward to December. I was going through my gallery, and I came across that video. I decided to play it. I fast forwarded to the part where I heard the sound, and surprisingly, that sound is clearly heard in the video. I don't know how it could be heard clearly, but here's a small clip from the video. I got goosebumps and closed my phone. I promised myself not to go near that building ever again. Let me start out by saying I was a non-believer of the paranormal until this night. I was with 4 buddies. I won't list any names for safety reasons. We went to hang out and talk in an old, supposedly haunted trailer late at night. The owner and multiple people who lived there all told me that it was haunted by demons, and me being the new guy to the group, I needed to be initiated. This initiation consisted of walking into the haunted back room. I did as they said after they convinced me, and walked in and then quickly ran out. My friends thought it was hilarious and went to prove to me that it was all not real. I went behind them to record them and see if we could get any proof of the demon. My friend went to open the closet, and that's when I got spooked by a loud audible crash in the closet and ran away. My friend thought it was hilarious, and after more convincing, dragged me back inside the house to record him. My buddy and I got outside of the trailer to rewatch our footage, and what we caught scared me beyond belief.
Dude, I just heard shit in the closet. Yo, bro. Oh, fuck! Hey. What the fuck? Oh shit! Oh, fuck me, fuck. Fuck! Look at this fucking video! Chase, look at this!
Dude, I saw it.
Fuck me, fuck!
Get the hell out of there, dude!
The closet opening and closing, loud knocking and windows being tapped on. All the while I captured orbs outside of the room. While I was outside waiting for my friends to come back out, I heard the trash cans rattle and immediately called my friends out. We didn't see them move, but a little later on we had things thrown at us from an unknown place. I had a live bullet tossed into my leg, and one more land inches away from my buddy's leg.
I have it on video. You were making that shit. Wait, if you're there, then who's throwing shit?
Huh? I just came back from smoking with Roy.
Yeah.
Oh shit.
They just passed by, I took a hit and they kept walking.
We have actual fucking proof of that ghost.
Eventually we went to get out after I practically dragged my friend into the car, only to have our car alarm go off as we opened the car door. When we got home, my buddy showered and said his back hurt, and when I checked, I saw he had multiple scratches up and down his back, as you can see in this image. It was a normal evening. My best friend and I decided to go for a walk. It was around 10 o'clock in the evening, so it was as dark out as it was gonna get. I live in a small village, so we usually just walk around the streets. There weren't many people out at this hour. We were kind of just walking and talking. A little while into our walk, we started to head home. We went up some hill, which led to the little town area and the only store we had in our village. But as soon as we came up the hill, we saw a weird-looking figure in the distance. It looked like an abnormally tall woman covered in a sheet of some sort, and it had its neck tied with a string or a rope. This is the video we took of the figure. Honestly, it reminded us of the movie The Nun. It was really hard to see since it was totally dark and the streetlights weren't exactly the brightest. It was moving very slowly, and it was waddling left and right like it was drunk or injured or something. We couldn't figure out if it was walking our way or not because it was moving so slowly. It was a really disturbing sight at that moment at that hour of the night. After half a minute of standing there, we realized it was walking towards us. We ran as fast as we could when we realized it didn't even have a visible face or just anything to take note of specifically. We walked around to go home, hoping we wouldn't see her again, but we thought we would, because if we calculated it right, we would meet again on one intersecting street, but luckily we didn't. The next day I told my friend about what happened, and she told me she also saw her, or it, while she was driving with her sister past the bar, which is on the street we thought we would see her again. She moved slower than us, and I really don't know how we missed her, but luckily we did. My friend described the figure just as horrifically as it appeared from the distance to us that night, and since that night, we never saw her again. This just happened a couple days ago. This isn't something that happened to me, but rather something that happened to a family friend. Our family friend, who I'll call Buddy for the sake of this video, believes that something has attached itself to him, something paranormal. It started when he moved into a new house. Almost right away, Buddy and his family started experiencing paranormal activity, such as shadows and voices. One night, Buddy had found a weird discovery in the basement of his new home. Upon doing some moving in the basement, he found something that he had not seen prior to the move-in. He found a stolen cemetery wreath. This made partial sense because the town cemetery was in walking distance of the house. Buddy was aggravated with the activity going on in his new home, so out of anger, he snapped the cemetery wreath, and in his own words, "When I snapped the wreath, every dog in that town started howling. There must have been 20 dogs all howling at the same time. I was scared to death." After that, the activity worsened, and they had no choice but to move. But it seemed the activity followed them to every house they went to. Recently, they've had some of the worst experiences in this apartment they currently live in. Buddy and his wife, who I'll call Pam, have been repeatedly followed by some kind of entity. They decided to set up a phone recording for the night and try to capture anything that might seem paranormal as evidence that they weren't crazy. What Buddy found on the phone was horrifying. He woke up at 3 to review some footage and found a 5-second video that had been taken after the previous recording had stopped. Keep in mind, they have no pets, no children that live with them, no TV or radio was on at the time, and both Buddy and Pam were in bed when this happened. You can clearly see something pick up the phone and a female voice speak into it. I can assure you that is not Pam's voice or any other voice that they're familiar with. Everyone thinks it says, "Did you tell Daddy to rape me?" But you guys take a listen for yourself and come to your own conclusion.
You tell Daddy you raped me?
Almost a night after this recording, one of Buddy and Pam's daughters died from an overdose. She was 30 years old and 7 months pregnant and a mother of 4, getting ready to be 5. Could this video have something to do with it? We don't know. But if it is a coincidence, then it sure is one hell of a scary one. I work at a CVS open 24 hours a day. I've been working at this location for 3 years now, and I'm one of the higher-ups. I agreed to take on the overnight shifts because I believe it helps my chances of getting another promotion, and I like to be on my boss's good side. There would only be one employee working the 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. shift, as that's all that's really needed. Once the pharmacy opens at 9 a.m., that's when business usually picks up. The 2 employees before me left after I was set up. At my hours, so few customers come in that my job varies from cash register to simply stock working. The beeper at the front door that would go off would alert me when a customer would enter, so I'd know when to go back to the register and wait. A few hours into my shift, I went back to the register to check my phone, which I had charging, and I had a new voicemail from an unknown number. I pulled it up and listened. It was some weird voice on the other end that I couldn't tell belonged to a male or female, and I couldn't understand what they were saying. Like, the sound quality was terrible. The transcription was unavailable for that reason. Obviously, I just ignored it because everyone gets weird calls once in a while. As I continued doing stock work, my phone started to go off. I pulled out my phone and saw a bunch of texts from that number that just called. The first text said, "Call back when you can." The second one said, "I know you're at work, I'm coming to visit." The third one said, "What time are you working till?" I had no idea who this could be. I texted back, "Who the hell is this?" The typing bubble popped up for like 20 seconds, then it went away. They didn't respond to that. Okay, a little unnerving, yes, but I still had to go about my work. Eventually, I heard the ding by the front door, alerting me someone entered, so I went back to the register and waited. I didn't see anyone walking around though, and I waited there for quite a while actually. Eventually, I just decided, okay, that's enough waiting, and went back to stocking shelves. I'd say it was around 2 a.m., a couple hours into my shift. I got a new cart full of items from the back section, this time beauty products, the second aisle in the store. I brought the cart over there and noticed a woman in the corner of the next aisle over, the first aisle. I stepped into that aisle and looked down, asking if she needed any help. She was looking down at one of the products in the corner. She didn't acknowledge me. Didn't know if she heard me or not, but I just felt awkward, so I left her alone. I walked back to the register just to wait there for her to finish up, and then I started getting more texts from that number. I was basically getting spammed with random messages that made no sense, except one that said, "I'm here." So I said screw it and I called the number. I heard a ringing sound coming from inside the store, and my heart started beating twice as fast. I felt a heavy feeling in my throat. I canceled the call, and the ringing stopped. I brought myself to walk over to that last aisle again, where the ringing was coming from. That woman was still there in that corner. I yelled, "Joke's over, I'm calling the cops, whoever you are." I almost knew it had to be some girl I knew playing a prank on me. I went back around the counter because for some reason I felt safer there. I really didn't want to call the police though. Instead, I called my best friend, who picked up on the first try. I asked him to think of anyone we knew with brunette hair who had my number and would be playing a prank on me like this. He guessed a few names, but based on the body shape of that woman, it was none of them. My friend told me to just stop being a pussy since it was a girl. I told him, alright, whatever, and hung up the phone. I was about to suck it up and walk over there when I noticed her, peering half of her head from around the corner of the beauty aisle. She had to be kneeling down too because the shelf in that aisle is lower than the rest. The first thing I noticed was blood trickling down her cheeks. She was smiling and I heard her making these fucked up laughing sounds. It looked like she cut the skin on her cheeks right next to her lips, and this was when I realized she wasn't our age. She looked like she was anywhere from 30 to 40. I took one step closer and I recognized her. It was this lady with serious mental issues who had DM'd me with a fake account before. And as far as I knew, she was dangerous and was supposed to be in some psychiatric center. She must have gotten my number through my Instagram, which I have set as a public figure profile, which includes my phone number. Seeing half her bloodied face peering at me, smiling, made me want to yak. I yelled at her to get away or I'd stab her. Of course, a complete bluff. I ran to one of the back aisles and hid from her, and I only sighed a breath of relief when I heard the beep of the front door go off. I went to go check if she was still there, but she wasn't. And so I called 911 and had the police take a report, showed them the CCTV footage, and warned them of her name and that she had serious mental issues. The officers were very nice and told me they'd be in the immediate area in case she returned. I blocked the number she was texting me from, and I like to think the police contacted her family. I used to work the dairy aisle in a grocery store. It was the worst job I ever had. A lot of heavy lifting, expired dairy products, and shivering. The big dairy cooler was in the back of the store in the area where all the groceries yet to be stocked on the shelves were kept. I would often just chill in the dairy cooler, no pun intended, because the supervisors on duty would never think to check on me in there. I'd bring a hoodie just so I wouldn't get cold. Anyway, one night I was working till 10 p.m. The store got quiet past 9. However, Mr. Senko, the supervisor who was a pain in the ass, was on duty. So after stocking the milk cartons one more time for the night, I brought everything to the back area again. On my way back to the dairy cooler to just hide and chill in there, I saw very briefly, for like half a second, the face of someone through the glass of the cooler door. But they either just ducked down or faded away out of my view. Who was in there? I went through the doors to see, and got hit with that blast of cold air and the loud sound of the giant refrigerator blowing cold air into the room. Boxes, pallets, and crates of milk everywhere, but no immediate sight of anyone. There were many places to hide behind the giant piles of boxes, but no one was in there. So I did my usual. I sat on an empty milk crate hidden behind a big pile of boxes. Then suddenly the lights in the cooler turned off, and it went almost pitch dark, besides the light from outside the cooler coming in through the glass of the door. I had a mini freakout because I thought Mr. Senko knew I was in here and was basically signaling for me to come out. I stood up and came out from around the boxes, and then I froze. Something was blocking partial view of the two cooler doors. There was a silhouette of a really tall person right in front of me. It couldn't be Mr. Senko, he was kind of short. The figure right in front of me had to be a foot taller than me. Suddenly, the light flickered back on, and the figure I thought I saw right in front of me was no longer there. I nervously walked around where I thought I saw something standing. I even waved my hand through the air in that spot. I somehow felt like I wasn't alone in there, and so I burst through the doors and shut the dairy cooler light. I peeked inside now with the light off, but that figure I saw in there just a moment ago was still gone. I threw my apron off and clocked out early. I didn't care if Mr. Senko would be mad. I just needed to get out of there. That was the one paranormal thing to ever happen in my life. I do overnight stock shifts for various local Lowe's home improvement stores. All I do is work whichever specific location needs me for the night, usually dependent on which location is having the most business. My job is to unload trucks, operate forklifts in the back section and throughout the store, and do night stock work. The trucker on duty that night was Paul, the only other guy with me that night. Once we successfully unloaded the truck, he helped me sort them in the back room before going off to do another pickup with the truck. So I was left alone to continue work as normal, nothing I wasn't used to. I'd scan the new shipments to take inventory, then I'd bring the items out to the floor and stock shelves with the new items. That's exactly what I was doing, going back and forth from the back warehouse section to the main floor, stocking shelves, sometimes using the forklift. I was scanning items with the inventory gun towards the back section of the warehouse when a loud crash scared the living shit out of me, to the point that I jumped and turned around midair. It was a big box that had fallen off a large pile of pallets full of unopened packages. The box's contents didn't spill out, the box was still intact, so I went to get the forklift to lift the packages back up onto the pallet. It was at this point I smelt a funky odor, but it wasn't the most uncommon thing ever in the warehouse, so I continued my work. At some point later that night, I turned the corner into the paint aisle and saw someone walking all the way down at the other side. They were dressed in dark clothes. No one else was supposed to be in the store, and they weren't wearing work clothes. So I shouted, "Hey!" They turned around, and when they saw me, they took off running down an intersecting aisle. Naturally, I yelled again and started chasing after him. Of course, when I got to the intersecting aisle, he was nowhere to be seen. He could have been in any aisle by then. Still, I did one quick jog down the middle aisle to look through all the intersecting aisles, but I didn't see anyone. I called anyone who I thought could have possibly been on duty, but nobody even picked up. I was at a loss for who that could be. I had to assume it was an intruder. I returned to the warehouse, and as I walked through the doors, I heard another crash from the back section of the warehouse. I ran in that direction and discovered something had fallen from the same pile of pallets and boxes. That was it. I had to run and grab a ladder to go climb up the stack of boxes. When I got to the top, I realized there was a perimeter, or wall rather, of packages and boxes surrounding one big hole. In this hole, there was a homeless-looking man dressed in all black, the same man I had just seen. This was where the odor from earlier was coming from. He looked at me, and I looked back at him, speechless. I didn't know what to say. He got up and seemed as though he were coming to lunge at me. I quickly stepped down the ladder low enough to where I could jump off. Then I ran down the aisle of the warehouse and stopped. I got on the phone with the police, and a couple officers showed up 15 minutes later. Of course, the little secret home that man had made between boxes was empty now. He evacuated with all this stuff. Camera footage later revealed that man had been staying in that little secret spot he created for a whole week. No one really checks the camera footage unless there's a reason to. That's how he got away with it unnoticed for so long. Growing up in the suburbs, one thing I always enjoyed in the summertime was the ice cream truck, specifically Mr. Softy. As a very little kid, anytime I'd hear the song of the Mr. Softy truck echoing through the streets, I'd beg my mom for a few dollars and run outside to wave down the truck. I remember one of the first times I was ever left home alone. I was, I think, 7 years old. My mom was away somewhere and my dad was off that day. He apparently entrusted me to be home alone for a few minutes while he ran to the store. He was definitely the less responsible parent. I was in the living room watching SpongeBob, I'm pretty sure, when I heard the familiar sound of the Mr. Softy tune outside. I rushed to the kitchen and climbed onto a chair to reach the little basket on the ledge that usually had stray dollars and coins inside. I grabbed a dollar bill and some coins. I couldn't tell you the exact amount, obviously. I ran outside to the street and waved the truck down just in time. It pulled over, and the oldish man came to the window asking what I wanted. When I asked for a specialty cone, he told me I was a little short with the money I had. I believe I told him I didn't have any more money because my parents weren't home. I distinctly remember him asking me, "You're home alone?" as if he were confirming it. I said yes, and he started acting all friendly and understanding. He told me to come into the truck so that I could make my own ice cream cone. I stepped into the truck, and the man went and shut the door. He told me to help myself to whatever ice cream I wanted. He said he was going to show me how to be an ice cream man, and he went to the driver's seat of the truck and started driving us somewhere. My young, innocent self thought this was all super exciting as I was pouring soft serve ice cream into a cone. But I finished that cone and then started wondering where we were going, as we had been driving for a while. I went to the front of the truck to ask him, and he asked me in a more stern voice than he'd been speaking in to please go stay in the back of the truck. I listened to him. My appetite for more ice cream was suddenly gone as I got more uncomfortable. We went from a busy main road to a quiet residential road. At some point, I noticed the ice cream truck's music wasn't playing, and he was driving rather fast. The truck finally stopped in front of some abandoned-looking building, and he asked me to come follow him outside to the building. But not before we heard a tapping on the door of the truck. I heard a familiar, concerned voice yelling through the crack of the door. The man opened the door, and my neighbor Margie walked into the truck. She saw me and came to grab me by the arm and pull me out of the truck. She told me to wait in her car while she ran back to yell at the man. I was extremely confused at first. The man in the ice cream truck sped off down the street. This was a time before cell phones. She couldn't just call 911 right away. She ran to the nearest house. At first I was confused, but obviously I know now she was asking for the owner's phone. She called 911, and I'm sure she reported the suspicious ice cream truck and attempted kidnapping. I don't remember the rest, except telling Margie my story, her driving me home to be greeted by my dad and cop cars, and then being told to go inside after telling a couple police officers what happened. The exact ice cream truck was found. I'm not sure how they did it. Maybe by investigating street camera footage and getting the plate number. I was made to confirm the driver was in fact the man who took me into the truck. He was sentenced to prison. That's all my parents told me. I don't think they know his name. Either that or they didn't want to give it to me. Definitely not a memory I like thinking back on. Up until I was 28, I used to live with my parents in Camden, Maine, a rural boat town. They were hardly ever home because of work and just traveling a lot, so I'd hold down the fort a lot. My parents' property is large and private, so when they weren't home I'd often throw little parties. This was one of those nights. I had maybe 15 to 20 people over and we all hung out in the backyard. It started around 6 p.m. and people started leaving around 11 p.m. By midnight everyone was gone, and I was absolutely shot from a mixture of having been in the sun most of the day and then drinking since around 6. I changed and got into bed. Before I could even fall asleep, though, I heard something one would not expect to hear this late at night. It was the sound of an ice cream truck, only it was a tune I'd never heard before, a kind of creepy sounding one. The tune got louder until it seemed to be right outside. I lay there waiting a minute or two for it to go away, but when it didn't, I finally got up and went to the window to look outside. I couldn't see anything from my bedroom window, so I went downstairs and looked out the living room window. I could vaguely see what had to be an ice cream truck out on the lawn. My heart started pounding the inside of my chest. Who was it? Why were they here? What did they want? I paced around the living room for a bit, not knowing whether to call the police or my dad, or just simply wait for them to leave. The awful tune of the ice cream truck didn't stop though, it grew sickening. I ended up finally snapping and going out the front door to the porch. There, I could more clearly see the ice cream truck parked on our property, like a little less than 100 feet away from the porch. It was parked on the grass, and it wasn't exactly a typical looking ice cream truck. It was like a white van with ice cream pictures stamped or painted on. I was a mix of confused and worried, mostly worried. Saying it was an abnormal sight would be a gross understatement. I stepped onto the grass with my bare feet and walked just a little closer to the van. The headlights weren't on, so when I got close enough, I saw there was no one in the driver's seat. When I got even closer, I saw one of the sliding doors on the side was open. I suddenly felt as though I could be jumped at any second. I looked around me in a panic, and then ran back inside the house and locked the door. Now I did call 911, and I asked them to please hurry. The woman asked me to walk around the house and check to make sure everything was locked. I started from the main floor and worked down to the den to the back door, and the glass panel on the back door was shattered. It was unlocked and opened. I whispered this to the 911 operator, even though I was truly freaking out inside. She told me to go to a room with a lockable door and wait there until officers arrived. So I tiptoed to the nearest bathroom and locked the door. The operator told me to stay on the line and be quiet. A few moments later, someone on the other side of the door tried turning the doorknob. Then they banged on the door 3 times. The woman on the phone said quietly that she heard it and for me to remain quiet and calm. Then I heard the back door to the house slam shut, and half a minute later, the tune of the ice cream truck slowly faded away as the van was driven off. I told the woman, but she said to wait until officers arrived. They took a disgustingly long time to arrive. I was waiting in that bathroom for another 5 minutes. If they arrived in a timely manner, they could have caught whoever was at my parents' house. Instead, all that happened was I got a police report. My personal theory is the ice cream truck tune was supposed to be a distraction or something, while one of the people in it broke into the house, as I'm sure there were more than one person in that van. I'm happy this happened to me when I was 23 and not, say, 10 years old, because that would have traumatized me. This happened a long time ago. I was in the 6th grade. People used to call me Jimmy until around high school. There was this ice cream truck that would always drive down my block once a day in the warmer months. The driver got to know me on a more personal level. He knew my name and I knew his, Bernard. I'd go outside for ice cream so often that he'd slow down or sometimes even stop for a minute in front of my house waiting for me to come outside, knowing I was a frequent customer. Anytime I'd buy ice cream from his truck, I'd always get the same Oreo ice cream cup. He'd always stop and talk to me for a few minutes, and sometimes he'd give me free ice cream. There was this one Friday, though, and I remember it was a Friday because it was the start of the weekend that my parents were going away. On this Friday, Bernard once again passed my house, and it was one of the days that I went outside to buy from him. On this day, though, he gave it to me for free again, and because of that, I stuck around and chatted with him for a while. He asked me how things were going and whatnot, and I told him I was excited to have the house to myself for the weekend. He was surprised that I would have the house to myself at such a young age. He said I was lucky and to enjoy. Then he drove off, and the truck eventually disappeared along with the music. The rest of the story is the part that you may not even believe. I stayed up late in my room because my parents weren't home. I was playing video games on my computer when I heard the sound of Bernard's ice cream truck. It didn't start from the distance and slowly get louder. No, it literally seemed to turn on right outside my house. I went to my window and saw the truck right outside, playing the music at this late hour in the night, past midnight. It had to be Bernard, but what was he doing? The music suddenly stopped, and the truck's lights turned off. I opened my window a crack just to listen for what might be going on. Just the sound of crickets, until I saw Bernard appear from the darkness, quickly approaching my window, yelling, "Jimmy." He stopped when his face basically banged into my window, and he started telling me to come outside. He told me I could get all the free ice cream I wanted, but the way he was speaking, he seemed off. He seemed like he was on something. His movements were spastic and sporadic. He then tried pulling my window further open aggressively, and I screamed and yanked it closed. He started knocking on the window, and I screamed and begged him to leave or I'm calling the cops. When I said that, he turned around and ran back to his truck. The lights turned back on and he drove off into the night without the music playing. I was so scared I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to call my parents, and I was scared to call the cops. I just locked my bedroom door and tried to go to sleep, but it was a long night before I fell asleep. Bernard never returned to my block after that. But anytime I'd hear an ice cream truck passing by, I'd get paranoid it was him. sure we've all gotten computer viruses at some point in our lives, ranging from basic malware to Trojan horses. I was one day going through my school email when I was a teenager. There was this random, suspicious-looking email. It was apparently a job offer, or rather an offer for an interview for a summer internship position with this company I'd never heard of. There was a link at the bottom of the email that said it led to the company's website, so I clicked on it. A new web browser opened, but the web page never loaded. The loading bar was stuck at like halfway, and the mouse cursor had the loading symbol as well, but it just wouldn't ever load. It was only a white screen. After refreshing the page a few times, leading to nothing, I closed the page and deleted the email. The next day after school was when I noticed my computer was working overall much slower. It took a while to start up, it took a while for programs to open, sometimes the mouse would even freeze for a few seconds. It was extremely aggravating. I attempted to do a disk cleanup to speed it up, but it didn't do anything. I tried restarting it a few times, did nothing either, so I decided to use my mom's desktop computer in the basement to do my homework. The next time I turned on my computer, things were a lot worse. A pop-up kept coming up on my screen that I'd never seen before. It kept saying in all capitals, "Error, error," and every time I tried to exit out, another one would pop up. My mouse was locked to the window, meaning I couldn't move the cursor anywhere outside of the little window. At this point, I knew I had some kind of virus, though this was the most aggressive virus I'd ever seen. I pressed Ctrl-Alt-Delete repeatedly until it finally responded, and I was able to bring up the task manager and restart the Explorer, which actually fixed the issue. I was able to use my laptop again, so first thing I did was rush to download an antivirus program and hope that it would detect whatever was on my computer. The program did detect a large number of viruses and malware on my laptop, so I purchased the full version so that it could perform a deep, thorough cleaning of my computer. After a couple hours of me playing StarCraft on my computer, the program alerted me that the scan was complete and the viruses had been removed. But my laptop didn't exactly go back to normal working speed after that. Days later, I had a new suspicious email when checking my school email account. It was titled, "Open this now." I guess I'm a fool for choosing to open it after just getting a virus that I suspected was from that first suspicious email. Upon opening the email, I realized it was blank, but that there was a .zip file attached. The contents were unknown to me, but I didn't want to open it and find out what it was, so I deleted the email and went about my day. However, a few hours later, the next time I got back on my laptop, another error message kept popping up on my screen like last time. This time it said, "You didn't open your email," in all capital letters. I Ctrl-Alt-Deleted myself out of the pop-up once again, with my heart now racing. I opened my email again, and there was another new email, again titled, "Open this now," this time in all capital letters. Feeling threatened, I opened the email and downloaded the content. It was a collection of videos of me through my webcam. It was just me sitting there using my laptop. I don't want to get into detail, but I felt sick to my stomach when I realized the video captured me doing some embarrassing things. Along with the videos was a text document containing only my address. There was one more video in a separate folder. It was taken inside of a van speeding past my parents' house, and a creepy man's laughter could be heard over the sound of the wind blowing into the car. I placed a piece of tape over my webcam, saved all of my important files to a bunch of flash drives, and did a factory reset of my computer. Before doing that, I replied to the email that I was getting the police involved. And that's what my parents and I did. We reported the emails and evidence to the police, and they said they'd use their forensics team to find the culprit. Unfortunately, this hacker really knew what he was doing, because they weren't able to track him. I'd say this happened around 5 years ago. This game came out that I really wanted but didn't want to drop $60 on it, so I may have looked for ways to download it for free. I found some website off Google. It had some quick text tutorial on how to download the game for free, involving simply clicking the download button at the bottom of the page. The program started installing. By the time it finished, I opened the folder. but there was no game in the folder. It was just a bunch of weird text documents, so I already knew I was scammed. I deleted the folder from my computer at once, and that was that. Or at least I thought it was. After that, I'd periodically start hearing these weird sound effects and short 20-second cartoonish songs playing in the background on my computer. I tried to find what could be causing it in the task manager, but I couldn't, so I restarted my computer, and that seemed to fix it at least for a little bit. But then, as the week progressed, I noticed more and more stuff acting up. I'd get bizarre pop-ups, and random Internet Explorer tabs would open with sketchy websites and advertisements. My antivirus program wasn't doing anything to fix the issue, so I was planning on taking it somewhere to get it looked at the next day. In the meantime, I turned the computer off for a couple hours and just did other things with my day. When I returned to my room to prepare for bed, I turned the computer back on to see if anything had maybe changed. Upon signing into my account and getting to the desktop, I was greeted with something I wasn't expecting. My desktop wallpaper had been changed to some grotesque, horrific creature standing outside of someone's window. I nearly fell back in my seat as I saw this. No one in my family could have done this, as I have always had passwords on all of my devices. I turned my computer off by holding the power button for a few seconds this time. I didn't turn it back on that night. I planned on bringing it to the Geek Squad first thing in the morning before I had class. I went to sleep early since I didn't have my laptop to really do anything on. I woke up at some bizarre hour. It was still completely pitch black outside. I woke up startled from something, but I didn't know what it was. Not until I heard it again. It was a loud, aggressive bang at my window. I looked at my window, which had the blinds angled half closed. I somehow gathered the courage to get up and twist the rod, angling the blinds open completely. I saw something taped to the glass on the other side. I took my phone and rose the screen up to the window, revealing the same picture as what had been set as my desktop wallpaper. I didn't see who put it there. I didn't care. I went to get my dad and show him. When he saw the picture, he went under his bed to grab his gun and storm outside. He screamed at the top of his lungs that if whoever was out there ever came back, he'd unload the entire clip into their skulls. The next day, the picture on the window was gone. I took my laptop to the Geek Squad, and the two workers who were helping me said my computer was flooded with different types of malware. And after I told them my story, they were convinced I got a virus from trying to download that game, which apparently opened the door for new viruses. This somehow led to me becoming a target of some serious hacker who, to this day, I still don't know why they targeted me. I didn't get my laptop back for 2 days, but they worked their magic, and my computer was once again clean. I think my dad scared off whoever was stalking me, and just knowing how protective my dad is, and the fact that he has a gun, was the only reason I was able to sleep after that. I'm currently 26 years old, so this happened 3 years ago because I know I was 23 at the time. It was my last semester in college. I had to do an extra semester to fit all my credits. I was doing really poorly in one of my coding classes, so I used some forums a lot to help. I was reading a specific post regarding C++, and some deleted user posted a link to an archive folder allegedly containing answers to the textbook problems that I was currently working on. That was actually a godsend given my current situation, so I downloaded it. Not that I ever condone cheating, I was just undergoing an unbelievable amount of stress with this class. I used WinRAR to decompress the folder and view the contents. Interestingly enough, there was another compressed folder inside the folder I just decompressed. When I tried to decompress this one as well, I saw it was password protected. In one of the text documents titled README, it said to obtain the password, run the file titled run.exe. I checked the folder and saw there was in fact a file called run.exe, so I ran it. Biggest mistake I made. My computer made a weird noise, and for half a second a small blank window popped up, then disappeared. Nothing else happened, so I tried running it at least 3 more times, But when nothing happened, I gave up and put the folder into the recycle bin. It wasn't until the middle of the night that something else happened. I woke up to a screaming sound from inside my room. I nearly shat myself. I found myself pushing up against the wall at first, dazed and confused. I saw the light of my laptop screen glimmering through the closed lid. The screaming sound seemed to be coming from my laptop as well. See, I keep my laptop on overnight, just plugged in, but I always keep the screen closed. I didn't understand how the laptop screen could be on or how it could be making noise if the lid was closed. The sight and sound emitting from my laptop in the middle of the night was surreal. I felt scared approaching it to turn it off. When I opened the screen, my desktop wallpaper was changed to a disturbing, screaming face of this horrible creature. It was nightmarish. All my desktop icons were gone, and the taskbar was red. I couldn't move the mouse, and pop-ups shortly started appearing, all of them saying run, all as that horrible screaming continued. I held the power button on my laptop until it turned off, and I unplugged the cord. Obviously I knew I had a virus, but that was just something else. I booted my computer into safe mode the next morning and restored it back to an earlier date, and that did the trick. But a few days later, I received something in the mail with no return address. Inside the envelope was a big printed picture of that screaming face. On the back it said, "Run." I crumpled it up and threw it in the trash, which was a mistake because it could have been used as evidence. But I never received anything else in the mail after that. When I think back now, I wonder if that .exe file wasn't named run as in telling you to run the file, but rather it meant run. There's this abandoned mansion in Toronto that came up in a group chat among my friends. We saw pictures of it through a mutual friend who had recently gone to explore there. It looked immaculate based on the pictures, and we were intrigued to go check it out. It was 10 miles north from us, so the drive wasn't bad. The mansion sat on a big open grass plain, with pine trees and other foliage surrounding the perimeter of the property, acting as a natural fence or just a wall of privacy from the outside. My friends, who I'll call Chad and Brad for this story, followed close behind me as I led the way up the large gravel driveway towards the front of the unfinished house. By the looks of it, construction on the structure had been abandoned when it was near completion, as the outside foundation seemed to be finished. Our mutual friend who found out about the place had told us that he hopped through a back window that was left unlocked, so that's what we looked for. The unlocked window turned out to be in the kitchen, right over the counter, so one at a time we squeezed through the window, crawling onto the counter and then down to the ground. First impressions in the kitchen, almost immaculate, minus a few of the cabinet doors sprawled out on the floor as if they had yet to be installed, and just things like sheetrock boards laying around. But everything seemed new, and it was a shame the construction was abandoned. The three of us kind of went our own directions in the house. I went towards the living room, which again was almost pristine. It was a huge room that transitioned into the dining room, and then from there, a wide hallway with at least 10 different doors. My friends were already checking out some of the rooms in this hallway. I peeped into each room and realized most of them were bedrooms. At the end of the hall was a 3-door garage. The last door in the hall before the garage was the basement. I called to Brad and Chad that I was checking out the basement. I got an acknowledgement from at least one of them. The basement had this bizarre spiral staircase, so when I got to the bottom, I couldn't even see the door at the top. There were no windows down there, so besides my flashlight, it was pitch black. It was a completely unfinished basement, pieces of drywall everywhere, unfinished wood foundation where walls should be, but the basement was huge. Like there were multiple sections down there. It was big enough to fit a basketball court and more. Then I came across this back room with a few storage containers. I was here to explore after all, so I curiously started lifting the lids off the containers. The first two seemed to contain building tools and supplies like wood planks. But then I heard something from one of the other containers. It was like something caused the container to make a bump sound. Could it be an animal? Or was I just hearing things? I went to the container and noticed the lid was not sealed on this one, as it wasn't sitting perfectly snug on the top. As I bent over to try and lift the lid, it lifted without me touching it, and I heard a whispering noise. I fell backwards on my hands as this happened, and while I was on the ground, I saw a smiling woman looking at me. The only thing lifting the container up was her head. She looked at me, laughed, and said peekaboo, and she laughed some more. I ran to the top of the stairs, but the basement door was now locked. I banged on it for my friends to open it up, but they were apparently messing with me. I heard creaks on the spiral staircase below me. I couldn't see her yet, but I could hear her laughing getting closer, and she was mumbling incomprehensible things. I screamed at the top of my lungs to please help me, and Chad finally opened the door. I ran out and looked back for half a second, greeted by this ghostly, skinny figure of this pale woman looking up at me, almost at the top step. I slammed the door shut and locked it. Chad saw the woman too, and we bolted for the front door. We didn't care about leaving it open. The three of us got to the edge of the property to talk. After an hour of just sitting in my car thinking and talking, I agreed to go back inside and unlock the basement door. As scary as what I witnessed was, I didn't want to be responsible for someone dying down there. But when we got back inside, the basement door was wide open. I promise you we locked that door, so it made no sense. We once again bolted back outside towards the car and drove home, to never return to that mansion again. When I was a very young kid, we lived in an upper middle class neighborhood. Lots of space between each house. All the houses on our street were very nice, but there was one abnormally large house. It was closer to a mansion. It sat right across the street from us, and my bedroom window could look across to the windows of the mansion. Since our street was incredibly low traffic, our parents let us play soccer in the street. So my two friends Brian and Zeke were playing soccer one sunny day. It was usually just the three of us, so we had this kind of free-for-all version of soccer that we made up. Eventually the ball was kicked onto the property of the mansion, so I ran over to get it. When I picked up the ball, I looked at all the windows to see if the house owner was possibly witnessing me on his property. But at one of the top windows was a young boy who looked to be about our age. I hurried off the property and back to my friends. I asked them if they had ever seen the kid who lives in that mansion, and they hadn't. The second time I looked back at the window, the boy was no longer there. It wasn't for a while after that, probably a month, that I was in my room playing Nintendo, and for whatever reason I got up to get something, and I looked out my window across to the mansion, and I saw that boy at the window again. He was surely looking at me, all the way from across the street. It kind of creeped me out. I walked away from the window to ignore it. Why hadn't I ever seen that kid outside before? Come to think of it, why hadn't I ever really seen the owners of that house? I asked my parents about the boy across the street. They said they were pretty sure there was no boy in that house. So the next time Brian, Zeke, and I were playing in the street, we were thinking of potential fourth players to have a real game. I had an idea. I ran to the front door of that mansion and rang the bell. A 50-something-year-old woman answered. I asked if her son wanted to play soccer with us. She looked at me puzzled and said, "What son?" I replied, "The boy who was always at the upstairs window." I can't describe the look on her face besides shock and fear. She asked me what the boy looked like, and after my best description, a tear rolled down her cheek and she put her hands over her mouth. She brought me upstairs to the room where I kept seeing the boy. It was a boy's bedroom. She showed me a picture of a kid and asked me if this was the boy I was seeing, and I said yes. She told me that was her 8-year-old son Charlie, who died 10 years ago. That woman living there had been alone ever since she lost her son and husband. She believed what I said because I nor my parents would have ever had any way of knowing about her son. She didn't tell me or my parents what happened to her husband or son. As sad as this all was, it was still horrifying. There was one other time I saw the boy. I was in my room, months later, and I looked out my window to the woman's mansion across the street. There he was again, at the upstairs window. I could tell he was looking at me. I shut my blind with force and tried to forget about it. It still sends shivers up my spine when I think back on it. I was once hired to house sit for a friend of a family friend who was going away for a week. In this case, I should call it mansion sit because the family was absolutely loaded and the mansion sat on the rich side of town in front of a huge lake. I was 21 and it just seemed like a cool job to have for a week. The family's one rule was to throw no parties and no more than 2 guests at any time, which even that I thought was generous of them. The father's name was Benjamin, and that's the only name you'll need to know. Ben left me a list of things to keep track of every night, which included feeding the 2 cats and 2 parrots, watering the plants, among other things that really won't contribute to the story. The house was a half hour from home, so instead of just driving there and back every day, I opted to just sleep in one of the guest bedrooms, which they offered to me after all. The first day there, I got there very late, so it was a short one that got me kind of warmed up for what to expect the week ahead of me. After doing the insignificant amount of morning chores, I hopped in the pool they had in the backyard. The pool literally overlooked a gorgeous, tranquil lake, and even with the thought of getting to enjoy this unbelievable house for a week, I was still incredibly jealous. As I was in the pool, I noticed through the giant floor-to-ceiling windows to the living room somebody walking inside. I jumped out from the pool freaking out. I ran to grab the towel and dry myself for a second before storming inside yelling, "Excuse me." I didn't see anyone in the living room, so I entered the kitchen, and there was a fairly large Hispanic woman who looked to be about 35 to 40. She was just standing there as if waiting for me. I asked her who she was and why she was here while trying to keep myself composed and confident. She said in a thick accent that she was the maid who came every day to clean the floors and stuff. She introduced herself as Eliza. I instantly felt a sense of relief and introduced myself as Mike, the guy who was house sitting for the week. She spoke in as little words as possible. I don't think her English was too good, but she basically said she was going to clean the floors in the kitchen and living room now. I said that was completely fine and let her do her thing. I asked her how she got in the house, and she said she had her own copy of the key. So that was that. I went back out to the pool for a little longer to let her do her thing. When I got out from the pool, I dried up and took a shower. After my shower, I fed the animals again. The parrots were easier than the cats, surprisingly. I didn't see the maid again, but I didn't really want to get in her way and have awkward small talk with someone who could barely speak English anyway. I had a couple friends over that night because everyone was eager to see the place, but I respected their rules of only 2 guests at a time. I gave them the best tour I could. Then we kinda just chilled in the game room they had, played some air hockey and pool table, and drank a little bit. When I told my friends about the cleaning lady scaring the hell out of me, they both found it insanely suspicious. Like, why wouldn't Ben have told me about the cleaning lady? They brought up a good point, so I shot Ben a text, asking about the cleaning lady. He didn't answer right away, and I didn't want to call. My friends wanted to sleep over, but I didn't want to push it. I had no idea if they had cameras in the house or not. So they left, and quickly after I started getting myself ready to lay down in bed. At some point I got a text back from Ben, apologizing for taking so long, and then asking what cleaning lady, with 2 question marks and an exclamation point. I typed back, Eliza, the Hispanic woman who came by and claimed she was the cleaning lady. That's when Ben called me with a concerned voice. He got more details from me after telling me there was no cleaning lady. That was the whole reason they hired me. I felt like I had been taken for a fool, but more importantly, I was terrified that I may not have been in that house alone at that very moment. Ben told me to just hide in a bedroom and that he'd call the police for me. So we hung up, and I waited in the room for the police to arrive. I had Ben on FaceTime when the police arrived, so he could also talk to them. We all looked through the house together, from top to bottom, and we didn't see anyone. I told Ben the lady said she had a spare key, but he said he was confident that that was a lie, because they never made any spare keys. He was confident she simply snuck in when I was in the pool or outside in general. After we were sure there was no one in the house, the police left, but they made sure I locked all the doors and windows before they did so. I spoke with Ben a little longer, who was very comforting, and asked I just hold down the fort and call the police if anything else should happen. We hung up, and I went to bed. I locked the door, of course. I left the air conditioner off so I could hear any potential noises from outside of the room. As I lay awake, subconsciously waiting for a noise, I heard one from under the bed. It sounded like a squeak on the wood floor. I hopped out of the bed and looked under it. There were 2 people hiding underneath. One was the lady from earlier, Eliza. The other was some man probably 10 years older than her, with his hand over her mouth. They both locked eyes with me. I screamed and I ran for the door. The moment that it took me to unlock the door and then open and shut it was more than I was comfortable with. As I did, I heard them crawling out from the bed. I ran outside to my car without my shoes and drove down the street, where I called the police, and then I called Ben again. I waited for police cars to pass, and then I followed them. We once again searched the whole house and found no one. This time I didn't stick around for the night. Ben told me to go home and stay safe. The family booked a flight back home the next day, cutting their vacation short. The intruders were never identified. All that can be speculated is they walked in through the front door while I was in the pool because I didn't lock the door, and that they somehow knew the family would be gone. No further info is known. It was sometime in April, peak corona time in my state. Quarantining and lockdown were still in effect. There was nothing to do on Friday and Saturday nights besides Zoom calls with your friends. It was like a week after I finally hopped on the wave and agreed to jump on a Zoom call with my 4 friends, Ashley, Haley, Sylvia, and Alexa. It was a Friday night, and it was supposed to be our little Zoom drinking party. We were going to be playing drinking games and just staying up until the early hours of the morning. Ashley shared the link to join the Zoom call in our iMessage group chat. We joined one at a time, first Ashley, then me, then Haley and Sylvia. It seemed they were all on their laptops. I was the only one on my phone, so I switched to my laptop as well. It took a little while for Alexa to finally join, but when she joined, her screen was black. We all joked around, chanting Alexa's name and whatever, asking her what's up with her webcam. She started typing into the text chat of the Zoom call, saying she didn't know what was wrong with her webcam and microphone, that it said both were offline. We continued to joke around about it, but also tried helping her, though we didn't really know how to be of much assistance with that. Eventually she typed in the chat, "BRB, I'm gonna go try to figure this out." So we all went on to our drinking and just chatting on our video chat, while we figured Alexa was doing whatever to try to fix her computer. But something randomly happened sometime into our call. Something completely unexpected that kind of scarred all of us. Alexa's cam suddenly started working, and her box went from black to showing an old creepy man doing something I really don't want to repeat. When he noticed the camera turned on, he jumped to close the laptop, and the screen went dark again. The 4 of us screamed and started freaking out. We tried calling Alexa, but now it seemed her phone was off. We didn't have her mom or sister's number, so we all agreed to drive over to Alexa's place to see what was going on. Her mom answered the door in her robe, looking concerned. We asked her if Alexa was home. She said yes and called her down. Alexa never responded, though. Her mother said she had just gotten home an hour ago, but that Alexa's door was locked half an hour earlier. We all explained what happened on the Zoom call, and she freaked out and ran upstairs to bang on Alexa's door. That got no answers. We all got a sickly feeling when we realized what could be going on. Alexa's mom called the cops that second, and when Officer Perry showed up, we told him everything. He called for backup and went upstairs to knock on the door and tried to reason with whoever could be in there. When there was no response, he began to kick the door down. When he finally broke through the door, there was no one on the bed. The laptop and phone were left on the bed, but no one was in the room. The window was wide open, enough for someone to crawl through and hop outside down to the awning roof below. We all found Alexa in the basement minutes later. She was hiding under a blanket in the corner of the room. She said when she was home alone, she saw some older man with a big knife sticking out of his pocket in the living room, so she snuck down to the basement and hid. She didn't know when it was safe to come out of hiding, as she couldn't hear her mother getting home. Police backup finally showed up, and the information of the break-in and the man was sent to the local news outlets to alert people to be on the lookout. It's crazy how that Zoom call might have saved Alexa and her mother's lives. A few weeks ago, my friends and I decided to hold a Zoom reunion, as we had not seen each other for quite some time, and all of us finally had the time to chat since there was a lockdown in our country. We're all college students, and most of us had lost contact with each other, so we decided to post on our social media that we would be holding a Zoom reunion, which was open to all the alumni of our old school. We got responses from many people, and we even accepted people we didn't know as long as they knew our mutual friends. We wanted it to be a big social event and didn't really care who joined. Finally, the day of the reunion arrived. I scheduled a meeting and posted it on my Instagram story because there were too many people to individually text, which I now realize was a big mistake because I had basically given everyone access to join the Zoom call. The Zoom meeting began normally, with all of us excited to meet our old friends. We made some new friends through our mutual friends, and we were having a grand time, when someone called Sat_An_20 unmuted their mic and started making groaning sounds. We had a friend named Anne, so we thought it was just her pranking us. We texted her to stop because it was getting annoying, but to our surprise she texted back apologizing because she hadn't attended the call due to prior engagements. We were surprised and asked this Anne person to open their video and show us their face or they would be removed from the meeting. They didn't show their face, so I removed them from the meeting. The Zoom call resumed and we were all joking about the incident. Suddenly, my network strength became weak, and I had to leave the meeting. I joined back soon after, but Satan20 had somehow taken the opportunity and re-entered the meeting in the few seconds that we unlocked it. This time they began to share their screen and displayed a video of a black tunnel on loop. We were terrified, and a lot of people were leaving the meeting because of it, but my friends and I were determined to find the person who was destroying our reunion. We constantly tried to remove them from the meeting, but the second my friend's network connection weakened, somehow the Satan20 person became the host. There was nothing we could do now. The account was still playing the video on loop and chanting something in a strange language. We could have left the meeting, but really wanted to know who was disrupting it. Suddenly the video stopped, and Satan20 started talking in a distorted voice about how my brother Rav had completed the ritual and attained salvation, and we could take their help and do the same too. Here's the thing. I had a twin brother who died before birth. My parents had wanted to name him Rav. They told me when I was very young about his prenatal death and begged me to never talk about him. Only my grandparents and parents knew about him, as the subject was too painful to disclose to others. I had always wanted a twin, and blaming myself for his death, I never told anyone about him. Soon after, we had moved to a new city. I was certain that the only people who knew about my brother in the city were my parents. I had not told even my best friends about him. I had no idea how this Satan20 person knew about him. They truly had no way of knowing that I knew about. With shaking hands, and now without a doubt convinced that this was a supernatural occurrence, I wordlessly exited the meeting. I do not know what happened afterwards. I didn't respond to my friends' texts and have since not talked to them. To this day, I know this is an experience I will not soon forget. In April of this year, my school had made a virtual classroom thing where we would do all of our assignments online on websites like Google Classroom and whatnot. They also told us about a new tool called Zoom, where students and teachers can all have a virtual meeting to talk about schoolwork and stuff. Well, one day in May, after I finished my assignments, my dad went out on a night shift at his job. So it was only my mom and my mom was asleep. I called my friends, and we all agreed to try a Zoom call out with each other to catch up on how everyone has been, and it also eventually ended with us playing some console games like Call of Duty. At one point, around 10 p.m., we were playing Modern Warfare, and all of a sudden, one of my friends, who I'll call Jack for privacy reasons, suddenly told me that he saw a very sudden blurred movement behind me in my room, but he wasn't sure because my lights were off and the only light was from the TV in my room. I have a somewhat small room with only my bed, a drawer next to my bed, a closet in the left corner of the room, and my TV in the front. That's when I noticed that my pillow was on the floor. I went over to pick it up, and I just dismissed it thinking it accidentally fell or something. So I just went back to play with my friends. About 10 minutes pass by, and Jack once again says he swears he sees movement behind me in my room. When I turned around, I saw that the pillow had fallen again in the exact same spot. This time I became anxious because I knew 100% I put the pillow in a place that it couldn't possibly fall without someone or something moving it. I bend down slowly to pick it up, and then I hear Jack scream. I put the pillow on the bed and rushed over to my laptop sitting on my chair to ask him what was wrong. All he said was to look under my bed, and I saw it. I saw two glowing eyes which were lit up by the TV screen. Once the person realized that I saw them, they immediately jumped out and tried to grab me. I instinctively swung my arm at their head, and I hit him right in the nose. He looked to be at least 45 and had long, dry, straight hair that looked like it hadn't been cut or washed in at least a year. He had a scratchy-looking beard and was a very skinny but tall guy. He looked to be about 6'3". He fell onto my bed and I could see his nose was bleeding, so I took my chance and ran to my mom's room and locked the door. I could hear his footsteps stomping through the house coming towards the room, so I immediately told my mom to call the police despite her groggily shouting at me to tell her what was happening. She called the cops, and by then I could hear his footsteps as he was going from room to find where I went. When he came to the room we were in, he tried the handle, and when he saw it was locked, he knew we were in the room. But he didn't bang on the door like I thought he would. Instead, I heard a small chuckle, and then I looked under the little crack under the door, and I could see his feet standing there. As soon as I looked under, he looked through the crack as well, and I could see his bloodshot eye. I also saw a couple drops of blood on the floor, and then on the other side of the door, I heard "You'll pay for that" in a psychotic, high-pitched, childish voice. When I backed away, he screamed like a madman and started banging on the door over and over. I started covering my ears, trying to shut the sound out, and I could see my mom crying. Just then, we hear the sirens outside, but the man doesn't stop banging and shouting. The police knock on the door, and when they hear the man, they immediately knock the door down and come in. Literally like something from a movie. I heard the man stop, and I thought the police already got him. When I opened the door, I saw the man facing the two officers, looking like he was going to attack them. When he stepped towards them, one of them shot a taser at him, and he immediately fell and started shaking violently. They cuffed him and took him out to the car, and a third officer came to question me and my mom. I told him the whole story, and then the three officers started searching for the place of breaking and entering. And it turned out that he had broken in through the window in my dad's office room, and they found a small axe and drill under my bed in my room. We later found out this man wasn't documented, and no one knew who he was, and he didn't appear to have any family. He was sent to a mental institution, but that's not the worst part. The police later tried to find out where the man originally lived, and all the man told them was that he lived in the woods near my home. When the police went searching for his home for any evidence, they found a small secluded area in the woods with a small wooden shack. When they went in, they told us that they found multiple weapons, bags of old food, and worst of all, 2 pictures of me, one of me asleep, which was taken from inside the house outside my bedroom door, and one of me eating dinner from outside the window. I hope nothing like this ever happens to anyone, and I hope no one else has to add another bad memory to the long list from this terrible year. Remember Chuck E. Cheese? That old arcade with the singing animatronics? Of course you do. I just found out they went bankrupt recently. It made me think back to my horrible experience there as a very little kid. I was no older than 8 or 9. It was like my third and last time ever at a Chuck E. Cheese. This specific location closed down years ago, but it used to be basically down the street from our old house. My mom took my little brother and I, and she let us roam free and do our own thing and play the games, while she sat at one of the tables reading like most of the other parents. I was playing this clown game where you had to shoot the clown's teeth out with this little cannonball shooter. I was playing the games that would get me the most tickets for the prizes. I finished the game again, and the tickets shot out from the ticket slot. That's when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned and jumped in my seat. I was greeted with a giant Chuck E. Cheese mascot in my face. He held out his hand for a high five, and naturally I gave him his high five with a smile. He then pointed at the tickets and gave me a thumbs up. I think I just continued laughing and smiling and said yeah. Then he pointed at the tickets once more and motioned for me to follow him. So I ripped the tickets from the slot and followed the giant mascot. As we walked across the main floor, a couple other kids around like 6 came up to him saying, "Hey Chucky," and he gave them both high fives. I kept following him, wondering if he'd tell the other kids to follow, but he didn't. He would turn back every few seconds to make sure I was still following. Finally, we made it across the main floor by the stage towards this back area, where he waved me to follow him through this employees-only door. From what I remember about how I was feeling, let's just say a combination of weird and excited. We entered this narrow hallway, and I felt kind of special for being allowed access back here. Keep in mind, I had the mind and maturity of a very young child. The mascot led me to this back room where he motioned for me to enter first, so I did. It was this small changing room type of room. It had a few lockers on one wall and one long bench extending half the length of the room. That was it. He entered the room and shut the door behind us, and I noticed he locked it. That's when I became confused and afraid. I thought he was taking me to get a bunch of free tickets. What could he possibly do in this empty room with me? He approached me, put his furry mascot hand on my shoulder, and then started rubbing from my shoulder to my arm. Then he seemed as though he tried to reach lower with both of his hands, and I pushed him off and yelled, "Stop." That's when the person in the suit lifted the mask off his head, revealing some sweaty, middle-aged man underneath. He started to remove the rest of the costume from himself as he told me to be quiet. I sat there watching, shaking, and plotting my way for the door. When I thought he was distracted enough by the suit, I tried to run past him for the door, but he grabbed me and told me to stop. He offered me all the free tickets I wanted if I just behaved. I started to yell and pound on the door. He tried to cover my mouth, but I think he gave up when he realized it wasn't worth the risk for him. I unlocked the door and ran back down the hall in tears. I ran back to my mom, yelling at her about what just happened. She was distraught and went right to the front desk. The girl at the front desk seemed to be in a panic as well, and I think she called for her supervisor. Pretty soon, all the music was stopped and the place was put into a lockdown of sorts, where all the kids were to go to their parents. A bunch of workers ran to the back section, and eventually police showed up outside. I had to give my whole story to a crowd of like 6 people, and I was extremely nervous. The man in the Chucky suit was some random creep who snuck into the back section of the building to dress in one of the suits and apparently lure children to the back. Realizing and looking back at that now as a grown adult is disturbing and disgusting, that I was the victim of a predator. I never found out if that monster was caught. I used to work for Chuck E. Cheese very briefly when I was 21 years old. I was one of the janitors/maintenance workers. I know, not very awe-inspiring. I was broke as hell and needed money. All my job really entailed was cleaning tables and keeping the play areas generally clean. Sounds easy, but there was never really a time to just sit and take a breath. There was always something to clean or take care of. I would also be in charge of turning on and off the animatronics, opening the stage curtains, fixing busted arcade machines, and things of that nature. My shifts would always be later, from like 4 to 10 p.m. My location closed at 8 on weekdays and 9 on weekends. I would stay an hour, sometimes 2 hours after to get the place in top shape ready for the next day. So this one night, I was working past close like I usually did, Everyone had already left the building, including the other workers, so I was the last one in the building. I was dragging my cleaning cart around the arcade area. I had already turned off all the game machines. I was by that space-themed arcade machine where you had to press the button at the right moment to stop the light on the jackpot bulb. As I was passing by this machine, the space-themed music suddenly emits from the machine at a very loud volume, and all the lights start flashing again. I felt like my heart was in my throat, that's how much it startled me. I fiddled with my keys to access the control port of the machine to turn it off again. I'd never seen anything like that happen before. It suddenly just freaked me out, only because I was all alone in that big building pretty late at night. The weirdness didn't stop there though. By this point in the night, I had already shut down the animatronics on the stage, so when I heard Chucky's pre-recorded laugh break the silence of the room, my heart started pounding again. The laugh was short and cut off. It almost sounded glitchy. I ditched my cleaning cart to go backstage and check on the animatronics, and I could see they were in their idle modes now, meaning they would move their limbs and heads around every so often. I would have to go to the control room to turn them off, but this was the second strange thing to happen that night. I started getting paranoid that someone else was in the building with me, but that thought was interrupted when I noticed that the Chucky animatronic was facing me, and its head angled down perfectly to look as though it was looking at me. It was bizarre. Bizarre that I was finding it that disturbing. I'm not crazy, but for my own peace of mind, with my eyes on the Chucky animatronic, I walked past it, closer to the control room. I waited there for a few seconds, and then the animatronic spun 90 degrees to face me once more, perfectly. I swear it was once again looking right at me, and then the laughter emitted once again from the animatronic. But in a creepy, glitchy, cut-off manner, this time much louder, obviously because I was right next to it. I ran to the control room to hit the switch to turn everything off on the stage once more. I left the control room, and the Chucky animatronic was still facing the direction it was moments before. I left the stage through the curtain and just felt uneasy. I was starting to think maybe it was all just getting to my head. But that's when I heard the horrible laugh again come from the stage behind the curtains. That was the last straw. I took my card, clocked out, and left. I texted my boss the next day that I had to leave early because I was feeling extremely sick. He said it wasn't a problem, but he never mentioned anything about the animatronics being left on. And when I asked him if the animatronics had some kind of motion detecting feature to look at people, he said no, they didn't. I'm not the most superstitious guy, but I firmly believe I wasn't the only presence in that building that night. And I don't mean there was another person in there. This is a story from my childhood that I don't like to look back on too much. I was 13. My mom brought my two little sisters and I to Chuck E. Cheese one evening. My sisters are 4 and 6 years younger than me, so it was more for them, and my mom just wanted me to come along. My mom was playing games with my sisters, so I went to do my own thing. It was my only time ever at Chuck E. Cheese, so I was trying to play every game at least once. Eventually, a worker in a red polo shirt came up to me. He was in his lower to mid-20s, I'd say. He didn't seem that old. He asked me if I wanted some more tokens. I said, yeah, sure. He told me to follow him. He led me through this sketchy back door, which led to a back exit. I asked him where he was leading me. He said to his truck. He told me not to tell anyone, but that he had access to all the tokens he wanted and just kept piles of them in his car. I stopped following when I realized he was leading me to his car. I told him my mom would be mad. He tried to push that I follow him a little more, but gave up. Before I walked back inside, he asked for my AIM username, and I gave it to him, always excited for new friends on AIM. For those of you who don't know, AIM was an instant messenger that was all the rage before smartphones and texting really became a thing. I don't remember his username, all I know it was something with his name in it, which was Ben. I would sign on to AIM every single night, including that night after Chuck E. Cheese. I signed in, and I had a few friends online. Next thing I knew, I got a message from Ben, so I added him to my buddy list. He said, hey, it's Ben from earlier. I replied, what's up, and we started chatting. He chatted with me as if we were good friends already. I asked him how he was able to get all the tokens he wanted, and he said it's easy when you work there. He told me he was going to come to my house that night with a bunch of tokens. I told him, no, it's okay, and he told me, no, it's fine, you live really close to me anyway. I replied, how do you know where I live? And he said he followed my mom's van on our way home. I blocked his account immediately. I was beyond scared. I told my friends about it on AIM. Some of them said I should tell my parents or call the police. But I waited. Maybe he was bluffing. But no, he wasn't. I heard a truck pull up outside through my open window. I looked out the window and saw the black truck that Ben guy was leading me towards earlier. I saw him get out from the truck, and I know he spotted me because he started walking over to my window. I pulled the window in and locked it, and then shut the blind. By that point, he was already halfway to my window, and he was waving his arms at me. I ran to my mom to tell her. She didn't find it funny, thinking I was kidding at first, but I convinced her after she looked out the window and saw the black truck begin to speed down the road. My mom wanted me to show her the AIM conversation, but I couldn't, as I had deleted him off my buddy list and blocked him. My parents called the police, of course, but that was just for peace of mind. They couldn't do anything besides make a report. The next day, my mom called the Chuck E. Cheese and asked about a Ben. They said they had no Bens who worked there. There were also no employees matching that guy's description. The Chuck E. Cheese eventually handed the CCTV footage from the day before to the police department for an investigation, which turned up no results. My family never went to a Chuck E. Cheese ever again. I bought my first house that I currently still live in 2 years ago. I was in the unpacking and settling in phase. At the time, I was single and living alone, but I just figured it was time for a house. I had a couple friends over to help me unload the truck full of boxes, and I paid them with food since they wouldn't accept money. They hung around for a few hours after just to hang out. When my friend Dale went to the bathroom, he came back and said he heard some noises from inside the walls, and that it sounded like there were some pipe issues. I took note of it, and the two of them left a little later. Since it was a Saturday, I stayed up pretty late on my laptop watching Netflix. However, I was hearing some light thumping sounds from above me, which was odd because my bedroom is upstairs. The only thing that could be above me would be the attic. Then I remembered Dale's comments about the noises from inside the walls. I went to the attic door and pulled it down, and I actually had to take a deep breath because I was a bit nervous. I climbed the stairs into the attic and pulled the light switch down. One very dim yellow light buzzed on, just barely lighting up the attic. The noises in the walls stopped though. Either that or the noises just weren't coming from the attic, I imagined. With no boxes up there yet, it was just basically a big empty space, and I could clearly see no one was up there. The only things in the entire attic were a couple giant framed paintings leaning on one of the walls. I went back down to my room and tried to get some sleep, but I heard the noises again. Now I started to fear there was a small animal on the walls, like a raccoon. The sound still seemed to be coming from directly above my room. It had to be in the attic. So once more, I went up into the attic and looked to where I thought would be directly above my bedroom. The thing is, the attic didn't seem to extend the entire length of the house, so there's a wall covering where the section above my room should be. I walked over to the wall just to listen for potential noises, and I did hear noises from the other side of this wall. Then I looked at the two paintings leaning on the wall, how they were slightly angled. My heart started to race. I walked to the paintings and slightly angled one upwards off the wall, revealing a big hole in the wall. It took a few seconds for the reality to sink in. As I held the painting at an upright position, the painting was suddenly pushed out of my grip to fall flat on the floor. I nearly had a heart attack. Out from the hole came this sickly-looking girl. She seemed to be high on something. She was shaking, making weird noises, and she would start this creepy laughing. She grabbed onto me and dug her nails into my shoulders so hard I screamed, and I pushed her as hard as I could off of me. She fell backwards into the secret room, and I ran to the exit and shut the attic door behind me. I locked myself in my room as I called the police and reported that a crazy, dangerous person was in my attic. Cops arrived within 5 minutes. 3 cop cars ended up pulling up, and there were a total of 5 police officers in my house. 4 of them went into the attic, and I heard the struggle. The girl screamed like a creature, and it sounded like she was trying to attack the officers, which led to her getting tased. They finally managed to get her in cuffs and carry her out of the attic and outside to one of the cars. The girl had to be like anywhere from 25 to 35 years old, but like I said, she looked sickly. While the officers were still in the house, I went into the attic to examine the secret room. Inside was a pile of blankets, a dirty pillow, a lot of food wrappers, and human waste in one corner. It seemed as though this girl had been up there for a long time. It was truly a nightmare to discover this on my first night in my new house. The girl was taken to a nearby psychiatric center to get her the help she needed. My dad helped me buy my first house when I was 28. I was never spoiled, but my dad always had a lot of money, and when I wanted a house, he lent me a large amount of cash. The previous owners of the house were an elderly couple. As far as I know, the husband died many years before I moved in. The wife died just a few weeks before I bought the house. The son of the couple who sold me the house kept a lot of the furniture in the house for me, and he took only what he really needed or wanted, which made things easier for me, less furniture to buy. I did dump some of the more outdated stuff on the curb though, including this old rocking chair that was sitting in the living room. A lot of the furniture just had an older, creepy vibe that I didn't want in the house. The next day, I was cleaning out more junk in the upstairs section of the house for most of the day. A lot of it was heavy lifting, so I'd take breaks in between, and this ate up most of the day. I didn't really get an ounce of sleep the night before, as I have a mild form of insomnia which affects me certain nights. That second night, having moved into the house, I went out to get some Chinese for dinner because I had no energy to cook. When I got back, I was disturbed to find the front door was unlocked. Now, I truly don't remember if I had simply forgotten to lock it or not. I wanted to believe I forgot, but it just seemed so unlikely I'd forget to do that, especially with my brand new house. I started flicking on every light of every room on the main floor. The more light, the safer I'd feel. I then proceeded up the stairs to do the same there, in the common area and in all 3 bedrooms. There was also a basement to the house that I'd only been down inside once at that point. It was not a big basement like you would expect though. It was kind of just a small storage space where the washer and dryer happened to be. I was already feeling a lot more confident that I had just simply forgotten to lock the door, but I still had to check the basement before I could confirm this. I opened the basement door and I flicked on the light. As I got halfway down the stairs, I saw an old rocking chair sitting in the middle of the basement. I didn't remember it being there the first time I saw the basement, and when I stood over it, I could swear it was the same rocking chair I had thrown away the night before. If not the same one, at least an identical one. I looked around the basement though, and there wasn't anyone down there, so I did calm down just a bit. I headed back upstairs to eat my Chinese food. I remember leaving the basement door cracked open though, which sat right next to the kitchen, and I started hearing rickety, creaking sounds from downstairs. I ran to the basement door and I tried to turn on the light, but it wouldn't turn on this time. All I could think was, what the hell was that noise? I went to the kitchen to grab my flashlight from under the sink, and I went a quarter of the way down the stairs with the flashlight beaming down to the bottom, and I saw the rocking chair moving, and someone was sitting in it. It was an old woman with gray, curly hair, glasses, and she was dressed in a pink nightgown. Her head slowly turned to be looking up at me. I gasped and left the basement, closing the door this time. I don't know what I was immediately thinking at that point. All I knew was I had to call the police. But when they came, they searched the whole basement with me, and we didn't find anyone. There were also no hidden compartments or exits down there where she could have escaped through. At a certain point, the cops started looking at me like I was crazy, I knew it, and pretty soon they left. I had the contact details of the son of the couple who owned the house before me, so I called him up around 8 or 9 p.m. and described the lady to the best of my ability. He sounded shook and started to cry over the phone. and said I just perfectly described his mother and her favorite nightgown. He said he'd be right over. He got to the house within the hour, and we went downstairs together. He seemed to be in shock the whole time. I could see his hand shaking. He ended up leaving with the rocking chair after a while of talking with me and being very emotional. It may have been emotional for him, but it was the scariest thing I could have possibly ever witnessed with my own eyes. It still stands to be. I kept the basement door locked 24/7 after that, and I'd be scared to do laundry for months. But after half a year of nothing happening, it wasn't that bad. I only lived in that house a year and a half, though. When I was 12 years old, my family moved to a new house in the countryside of Louisiana, located near a small village. We'd always lived in rural areas, definitely grew up unfamiliar to the city lifestyle or anything even remotely close to that. The property was 3 acres and very private. On the second night at that house, our dog Parker, who would sleep in my room, started barking and growling in the middle of the night. When he saw that I sat up in my bed, his tail started wagging, but he'd continue to bark and growl. I couldn't tell what he was looking at though. He was just looking towards the corner of the room. I checked the closet and nothing, so I told Parker to shut up, and he did. But I did keep hearing him lift his head off his bed every once in a while, reacting to something. The next day, an older man came and knocked on the front door. My dad answered while I was in the living room watching cartoons. I heard the whole interaction. The old man introduced himself as Gene, the next door neighbor. My dad told me to come over and introduce myself, so I did. Gene seemed very kooky and aloof. Even my 12-year-old self could realize that, but he seemed nice, I guess. The next day, I was in the backyard playing Pokemon on my Game Boy. My dad was in the front of the house mowing. The rest of my family wasn't home. Oddly enough, over walks Gene wearing a farmer's hat and overalls, talking to me in his thick southern accent, asking what I was up to. He actually sat down at the table with me, which made me uncomfortable, especially considering he just walked into our backyard. Albeit there was no fence separating the front and backyard, but still. I told him I was playing Pokemon, and he knew what it was, immediately making Pikachu noises trying to be funny, but it was just unsettling. I started to realize there really was something off about this guy. My dad came to the backyard with a lawnmower, then turned it off when he saw Gene sitting next to me. He approached us and said hello with a smile, but I could tell based on my dad's face and tone that he was slightly confused what he was doing in our backyard. He never asked him that, but my dad told me I needed to go inside and wash the dishes. I knew he was trying to get me away from him. A few minutes later, my dad came in and asked me if Gene just walked into our yard, and I said yeah. That's when he told me he didn't want me around that guy anymore, and to let him know if I saw him again. It wasn't until a few nights later that I woke up to Parker growling and barking again. This time he was looking at the window. I got up to open the window just to hear if something was going on out there. Quickly after opening the window, without seeing anybody out there, I heard Gene imitating Pikachu noises again, in his creepy old man's voice. I ran out of my room screaming "Dad" repeatedly. When I told my dad Gene was outside my window, he stormed outside to check. But when he couldn't find him on the property, he went to Gene's house next door. But here's the twist. That Gene guy didn't live next door. An older woman answered the door and had no idea who he was. So my dad went to every single neighboring house, and nobody had ever heard of a Gene. My dad called the police to report the man. Police said they would be on the lookout for him, and it even made the news. We never again saw or heard from Gene, or whatever his real name was. Has anyone ever had sleep paralysis before? I tell you, it's one of the strangest, most fascinating, yet horrifying things that you could experience. It's the feeling of being unable to move upon awakening. Your senses and awareness are intact, but you still feel as though you're in this half-asleep, half-awake state. I'd heard stories of this long before it happened to me. I've only experienced it once. I was in college. I was going through an incredibly tough time in my life, and I was insanely stressed during finals week. I wasn't getting much sleep. It must have been the night before my last final. I went to bed late because I stayed up all night studying for bio. I don't remember at what point I decided to finally call it. I just remember it all becoming a blur, then blackness. Next thing I remember, I was in my room, in my bed, but there was this weird haziness in my awareness. Like I was awake, but I felt weaker. And when I tried to move, I couldn't. I could only move my eyes to look around the dark room. At one point, when I guess I was looking to one side of the room, I looked back to the center, and there was this woman standing dead center in the room, facing the bed. She was wearing this black dress and holding some long object. I wanted to call out, "Mom?" but my paralysis prevented it. I couldn't say anything. The woman came closer to me until she knelt down and touched my forehead, and I could feel it. She got eye to eye with me, and I could see my mother's face. I tried to say "Mom" again, desperately, but I was stuck in my own body. She stood back up and walked to the doorway before disappearing into the house. I lay there unable to move maybe another 10 to 20 seconds before my vision suddenly became more clear, and I was able to think more clearly as well. I was able to sit up. I jumped out of the bed screaming "Mom" over and over. I ran to the bedroom hallway yelling her name. A door opened down the hall and someone came to hug me, but it wasn't my mom. It was my dad, telling me he misses her too. My mom died 3 weeks before this happened. You know what I love about dreams? How vague and how bizarre they can be. You feel like you're in this separate world where things can just make no sense. Now what about when that unearthliness transcends into the quote-unquote real world? You'll see what I mean in a minute. I was in REM sleep having this bizarre nightmare about being followed by some weird creature in the middle of the woods. The dream became fuzzy though, and I kind of woke up from it. I say kind of, because while I was out of the dream and back in my bed, I couldn't move a muscle in my body. I started hearing this faint, weird noise. It was this indescribable, robotic, yet alive type sound. It started light and soft, but it repeated every 3 seconds. I noticed it was getting slightly louder every time. I felt like the sound was getting closer. It got so unbearably loud in my head, I just wanted to scream, but I couldn't. Then my eyes locked onto the closet door, specifically the crack in the closet door, which I never leave open ever. There was this distorted face of a man looking between the crack, with this unhumanly large open-mouthed smile, and every time I heard the noise, it seemed as if the closet and the face were getting closer, until the closet door slammed shut, and everything went silent. I regained control of my body shortly after that, and the first thing I did, even though I was 24 years old, was run to my parents' room to get my dad to check the closet with me. There was nothing in the closet though, or the rest of my room. My dad seemed pretty confident that what I just experienced was sleep paralysis, and that he had experienced it once as well. Didn't make me feel any less disturbed about what I just went through. Many years ago, I had a sleep paralysis experience. I knew there was a thing in my closet, something really evil, but I also knew I was dreaming and I should face my fear. I tried not to look directly at the closet door, but if I moved my eyes, my head would turn away. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't look directly at it. Then I woke up in a cold sweat. At first I felt really relieved that it was over, but very shortly I realized it wasn't a dream, and there was really something in the closet. I was laying on my back and couldn't move, and I didn't really hear it, but I could kind of feel the sickening laughter wash over me in waves, emanating from the closet. All of a sudden the thing throws a human head at me and it lands on my chest face up. It was this girl I knew in high school. Up to this point I was kind of holding it together, Terrified, but not panicked. Well, I lose it now. I can't even scream. All I could do is make these grunting sounds and moaning noises. I'm wriggling and straining, trying to rock from side to side to get it off me, but I can't move. This seemed to last maybe another minute or two, and then I really woke up. It was so traumatic that for weeks I would be scared when I woke up that I wasn't actually awake and something horrible could happen at any second. It still makes my skin crawl when I think about that laugh. The thing is, I never heard of sleep paralysis or night terrors at that point in my life. I thought I was losing my mind. I've suffered sleep paralysis a total of 3 times in my life. The first 2 times, it just consisted of me waking up not being able to move my body. The third time was much different though. I had woken up very early morning, probably like between 5 and 6 a.m., when the sun was just starting to come up. There was light in the room, but barely any. I tried to move, but I had that unfortunately familiar feeling of paralysis, helplessness. My eyes fixated on the wall. There was nothing I could do. Then, suddenly, I heard heavy footsteps coming up the stairs of my bedroom. It was my brother, followed by my sister, dad, and mom. They were all sobbing hysterically, and they all seemed to be at least a foot taller. It was unnerving. The 4 of them approached my bed, then stopped at the bedside, towering over me, all 4 of them crying. I couldn't move. I wanted to cry for help or just yell at them to stop because they were scaring me. Their heights, they looked like they were near to hitting the ceiling. Then, just as quickly as they entered, all 4 of them turned and walked back down the stairs. I could move again, and so I ran down the stairs to follow them, but they weren't in the outside area. I went to each of their rooms one at a time. All 4 of them were fast asleep. My heart was racing because the most surreal, unnerving thing just happened to me. I had to lean on the wall to gather my thoughts for a second, breathing heavily. Falling back asleep was futile the rest of the night. I lay awake until the sun was fully up. A few days later, I was struck by a speeding car when crossing the road with friends and ended up with 3 broken bones and a fractured thigh bone. I was hospitalized for a week, and at one point, all 4 of my family members stood next to my hospital bed, looking down at me, my mom being emotional and crying. It was almost the same image from my sleep paralysis. I'm not superstitious at all, but if I were, I would 100% believe that dream was some kind of sign, or some kind of prediction of the future. In fact, I just got chills writing that last sentence, thinking about it. There was this one time I was out late drinking with friends. It was some point in the summer of 2016. We were kind of just walking around town and then around the neighborhood when one of my friends spotted someone hiding in a bush. He pointed and said, "Look," and we all walked a little closer to get a better look. We could see what he was talking about, but just barely. It was bizarre, like someone hiding in this bush in front of this house. When we got too close, apparently, this weird, off-putting sound started coming from the bush. So we all screamed and laughed and ran away. We screamed because it was scary, but laughed because at the same time it was bizarrely funny. And there were a lot of us, so... Anyway, we walked back to our houses respectively, assuming whoever was in that bush was just messing with people. I fell asleep pretty easily that night since I was drunk, but next thing I remember was waking up to the near pitch blackness of my room. I couldn't look at the clock to see what time it was because I literally couldn't move. I was in a sleep paralysis state. I looked around the room with my eyes only and started to hear a familiar noise, the noise we heard coming from that bush. Then I looked straight in front of me, at the foot of my bed, and what I saw was pure nightmare fuel. It was what appeared to be this floating, grotesque, horrific head of a demonic ghost-like thing. As it got closer to me, I realized it wasn't floating. There was a body, but its body blended in with the blackness of the room. Its mouth hung open, and it just kept making the familiar noise from the bush. It got mere inches from my face before it suddenly just faded away, and I was able to let out a scream and move my body. I sat in my bed panting and heart racing. I flicked on the lamp and checked around my bed, but that demonic thing was gone. What I just experienced seemed so real, like I was awake for it. It wasn't a dream. I told my parents about it the next day, and they agreed with me that it was sleep paralysis, though they had never heard of anyone seeing freaky shit like that before. This was an eye-catching post made in 2014, though it was eye-catching for the wrong reason. The advertiser states that he's seeking an unpaid young houseboy that will care for him, but he had to note that he meant in a non-sexual way. He also notes that he's a 55-year-old male who lives alone with his cat, but even if that isn't slightly concerning considering he's seeking younger males to live with him, he claims to have had 3 houseboys before. This could leave one to wonder whatever became of them. The lighting, angle, and just about everything else regarding this man's picture mirrors something straight out of a serial killer playbook. These kinds of ads are the very likely ones to be leading to something far worse than would appear on the surface. This was the listing for a bed frame that a subscriber named Rich sent to me and actually responded to. Firstly, right off the bat, the ad looks a little sketchy, starting off with the poor grammar and misspellings. Next, the poster claims that he's not storing the bed frame in his house anymore, but rather behind his buddy's storefront. This begs the question, why? Also, where is this storefront? What does it look like? If these weren't red flags enough, Lauderhill, the town in which this ad was posted, has an extremely high rate of crime. Rich explained in his email to me that he comes from a very poor background, and even though he saw the red flags in his post, he was willing to drive over to the location he received after texting the number on the ad. He drove to the location at 10:30 p.m., which turned out to be a closed-down looking thrift store. He stepped out of the car with the engine still running, and he said he knew to look straight for the bushes next to the storefront, where he could easily see 2 men hiding. He got back in his car and drove away and reported the ad. This was an incredibly creepy Craigslist post of a man looking to start an all-female band, specifically consisting of women aged 18 to 21. You could just assume by the looks of the ad and the man himself that he strongly considered typing 16 or 17 instead of 18. The ad calls for young girls who aren't afraid of older rocker dudes telling them what to do, and apparently that wasn't the only listing this guy posted. In one picture on this separate listing, the guitars and amps can really draw your attention away from the gross carpet, messy bookshelf, and bottle collection. But in the last picture, the man for some reason thought it was a good idea to capture his bandaged up foot in frame. This was a very transparently predatory Craigslist ad targeting young women. There's a section on Craigslist called Misconnections. This section is home to personal advertisements, which arrive after 2 people meet but are too shy or otherwise unable to exchange contact details. Like everywhere else on the website, weird things are posted in this section, such as this ad. The ad was posted by an anonymous man who seemed to be stalking a young boy. He said in the ad, "We've met on several occasions. Well, we haven't formally met, but I've seen you. You like to wear that Mets hat a lot. I love the Mets. If you like daddies, hit me up." The post actually included 2 photos of the boy on candid camera, one in a grocery store and one outside in a seemingly wooded area. The boy looked to be no older than 14. The ad was taken down the same day it was posted. This ad was posted in January of 2014 in Australia during a major heat wave. Temperatures were reaching up to 114 degrees Fahrenheit in certain regions, so this ad probably seemed like nothing short of a miracle at first glance. The ad offered free ice cream to anyone in the area, claiming they were doing it out of Christian courtesy. The ice cream truck would be parked in a location that would only be disclosed to people who contacted the poster. One person did end up contacting the poster of the ad, and was told to meet up at a certain parking lot outside of Kings Park. The boy and his brother who answered the ad, who said they arrived partially just to see if it was legit or not, did find the ice cream truck in the parking lot, but 2 police cars were also parked alongside it. It turned out the ice cream truck was stolen. The refrigerators in the ice cream truck were turned off and all the ice cream was melted. Who knows what they really meant by Christian courtesy? This one wasn't disturbing in the same sense of the others on this list, it's just creepy. This was an ad posted by a 26-year-old asking for a female roommate who he would waive the rent fee for only if they were willing to create some kind of romantic relationship out of it. Being that this was a guy posting on Craigslist proud of his openness of his intentions, it's likely he may have wanted more than just a relationship, possibly some more immediate services. There's a lot of these kinds of posts offering free housing for young women for relationships or open minds in return. In July of 2015, the FBI arrested 39-year-old Nathan Bryan for allegedly trying to solicit children for sex by advertising his babysitting services on Craigslist. Federal investigators suspected that Bryan was using the ads to gain access to kids, though this wasn't enough to prove that he was guilty of anything. So the FBI posed as a father who was offering their child for sex on Craigslist. That's when they were contacted by Bryan, warranting his arrest. This was one of Bryan's many Craigslist postings where he advertised his babysitting services. It may not seem too bad on its own, but knowing who was behind this listing is what makes it truly horrifying, and that any other listing like this one could have been created by someone with completely masked intentions. This is Richard Beasley, a man who was sentenced to death for the murder of 3 men who responded to an ad he placed on Craigslist for a non-existent job. He was also convicted of the attempted murder of Scott Davis, a man who answered the Craigslist ad, who was then shot in the arm while escaping from Beasley. This is the only screenshot that could be found from the specific ad that he posted. The ad said, "Wanted, caretaker for farm. Simply watch over a 700-acre patch of hilly farmland and feed some cows. You get $300 a week and a nice 2-bedroom trailer. Someone older and single preferred, but we'll consider all. Relocation is a must. You must have a clean record and must be trustworthy. This is a permanent position. The farm is used mainly as a hunting preserve, is overrun with game, has a stocked 3-acre pond, but some beef cattle will be kept. Nearest neighbor is a mile away. The place is secluded and beautiful. It will be a real getaway for the right person. Job of a lifetime. If you are ready to relocate, please contact ASAP. Position will not stay open." 3 out of the 4 men who answered this ad were shot dead by Richard. This is another missed connections post seeking another unknowing individual. This one is much more disturbing, however, as the poster, or stalker rather, has the young girl's address. He even posted a picture of the 14-year-old girl's house. In the post, he wrote, "Dear Sarah, you don't know me yet, but I've been watching you these past 2 weeks. You are a beautiful girl who needs to be taught certain things, and I could teach you those things. I could give you all the money you could want, and much more. I can promise you nothing but an amazing life if you choose to run away with me." The rest is just both his and her personal info. Now, this ad was screenshotted by a few people before it was flagged enough times to be removed. I was never able to find more details, such as if the family was made aware of this, or if the poster was found, or even if it was just some kind of prank. This ad was posted on June 10th, 2014, under the free stuff section. It advertised a free couch in good condition that would be put out on the curb around 10 p.m. In a normal neighborhood, this would seem like a lucky find. However, this ad was posted in one of the worst areas in Detroit, and one of the most dangerous times to be wandering the streets. Not to mention that anyone living in the area that this ad was posted in would not be looking to give a couch away, rather looking to make any penny possible off of it. This was a screenshot taken of the ad by someone who came across it. There's no way of knowing if someone actually fell victim to this, but this ad just had too many red flags about it. Most likely a group of people waiting for a naive victim to rob or harm, like the bed frame listing mentioned earlier in this video. This Craigslist post was an alleged confession of a murderer who was gloating about his first killing to the people of Tulsa, Oklahoma. It said, "I wanted to thank Tulsa for letting me have my first kill. It all started here, so I was thinking it should also be my first. I was nervous as hell, but I will get over it. It was a stranger on stranger kill, so the police will have a difficult time. It will not be my last, though. Thinking about going to Oklahoma City for the next. This wasn't the only ad of its kind to pop up. In fact, there was a second one that I could not find a screenshot for, which apparently showed a picture of a victim's body and the poster gloating over his second killing. This one took place in Stillwater, Oklahoma, and while it didn't mention a link to the first post, it seemed like too much of a coincidence. This is a rather strange ad by a young man looking for a roommate. When visitors to the ad would be greeted by this picture, which looks like something taken from a horror movie, they likely would not take this ad very seriously and would never dream of taking this guy up on his offer. Now, if that intro picture isn't enough to creep someone out, some of the rules and aggressive writing underneath should do it. Some ground rules. If I ring the bell in the kitchen, it means you have to go to bed no matter what time it is. I do not like people staying up late. You may have a friend over, but if they speak too much, they must leave. I like peace and quiet. No Indian visitors. Never touch the shower curtains. If it's closed, you come and get me and I pull it back so you can shower. There's two other pictures, one of a dimly lit room and one with a garbage bag over a window. If this ad was legit, let's hope this guy never found a roommate. This last ad was very open about its poster's intentions, and it's titled Cannibal Looking for Willing Victim. This ad included very graphic, blurred images that would give you a good idea of what exactly was going on to the victims. The ad said I'm going to be very open about my intentions. I am a cannibal and I'm looking for a willing victim. He even uses the word victim. If it has been your dream to donate your body as food, please contact me as soon as possible. I will not be torturing you or providing you with a slow death. Think of this as sharing your generosity with somebody else. My girlfriend of 7 years and I rented a beach house Airbnb in the Hamptons on Long Island in 2018. My girlfriend's name is Alicia. The house was very secluded, and it literally sat right on the beach, like back door led to the dunes. It was also more or less a completely private beach during the day, except for the occasional locals going for walks or jogs along the dunes. We were there for 3 days and 2 nights. During the daytime, for the most part, we lay in the sand with drinks, or we jump in the pool in the backyard of the house. The first night, we went to some local bars to drink a little bit, then went back to the house to relax and watch a movie. The second day there, like I said, we basically did the same thing as the first day, only this time we hopped in the pool first before going to lay on the beach to dry off. The house was absolutely gorgeous, a fantasy home for Alicia and I. Woods surrounding the house, pool in the backyard, and beach 10 steps from the back door. It all seemed like it was going to be a fantastic weekend getaway. We stayed on the beach for many hours, until around maybe like 4 or 5. Right as we started packing up and I stood up, I looked at the house, at one of the windows specifically, and I thought for sure I could see someone standing at the window, looking down at me. The sun was kind of creating a glare on the window at its current position, so I couldn't tell 100% if my eyes were playing tricks on me. I grabbed Alicia's shoulder and pointed up at the window. "Do you see that?" I asked. When she said, "See what?" I could see that whatever I thought I saw didn't seem to be there anymore. I told her to keep packing up while I ran back to the house and up the stairs to the bedroom window where I thought I saw someone or something. The room was empty though, as was the closet, under the bed, and the rest of the upstairs rooms. The only noise was the sound of the window air conditioners in various rooms, and then the door opening downstairs. It was Alicia arriving with the stuff, so I chalked it up as seeing things after lying in the sun for hours. That night we hit a couple of the same bars again. We stayed out later this night because it would be our last night there. I think we got back around 11. Upon entering the living room, we tried to flick the lights on, but they wouldn't. Then we noticed all the digital clocks from the cable boxes were off too, so the power was out. I looked around for a circuit box, but couldn't find one. It was way too late to call the homeowner. All that would happen is we'd miss out on watching a movie that night. We were tired anyway, so we just went upstairs using our phones to provide us enough light to prevent us from falling on our faces up the stairs. We went to bed, and the alcohol in Alicia's system helped her knock out pretty quickly. But then, I sat up when I felt like I heard something from outside of the room. I looked at the doorway. Someone walked past the doorway in the hall. I covered my mouth with my hands to prevent my squeal of horror from being heard. I lifted myself over Alicia to get off the bed and run to lock the door. The second I locked it, there were knocks on the other side, and someone said, "It's the landlord. I came to fix the power." I didn't believe it for a second. The knocks turned to more aggressive bangs, and the door started to shake as the man on the other side started twisting and shaking the doorknob. My girlfriend woke up and started to scream as she realized what was going on. I screamed, "Call the cops," to her, and I think this caused the man on the other side to stop. The next thing that happened after waiting in silence and fear was the sound of the police officers downstairs. They had entered the house through the front door that was apparently left open. The police investigated, took a report, and said they'd let the local media know of the incident. They even helped us find the circuit box and restore power. The next day, we left first thing in the morning, and on the ride home, I called the landlord, who said he hadn't even been near the Hamptons for a few weeks. The story I'm going to be telling you took place around 4 years ago as of today. I haven't told many people about this story because it's something I try to forget. Here's my story. It was a Monday evening, 4th of July. I just finished sophomore year in high school. I was invited to a few 4th of July parties. My parents grounded me a few days prior, so I couldn't go to any of them. However, I live in a neighborhood that's very connected, so my neighbors had a party outside in the cul-de-sac. My parents forced me to come outside for it. I'm not extremely awkward or anything, but I hate talking to older adults because I never know what to talk about. Luckily, I had a friend named Eli who lived in the same area, so I called him up and we hung out at the party. After a few minutes at the party, we got extremely bored. It just wasn't fun for us because there was no one our age in the area. We talked a little bit. Then Eli asked, "Doesn't Savannah live like down this street? We should go door ditch her." I agreed to Eli's suggestion, and we were on our way down the street. To clarify, Savannah is that extremely popular girl that every guy has a crush on in high school. It was awkward enough that we were neighbors, but her dad was also my dentist. We made our way down the street. The sun began setting quickly. Eli and I made jokes about dumb things we found funny at the time. Being honest, we were both pretty nerdy our sophomore year. I eventually asked Eli if he knew where the house was located because I'd never been to Savannah's house before. After scanning the whole area of houses, Eli began pointing to my west. He was pointing at a big house that was pretty complex. We lived in a mediocre area in Michigan. Houses like this one were rare here. Anyway, we sneakily approached the house. It was only to our surprise that no one was home. No cars in the driveway, the lights were off, nothing. We both began observing the house. We agreed that she probably went on a trip with her family. I suggested that we come back next week and do the door ditch. Eli didn't listen though. He kept staring at the house. He approached the front door. "Eli, let's go," I yelled. He told me to be quiet as he opened the front door. His face lit up. They left the door unlocked. Eli suggested that we explore the house and that it would be quick. Being the curious teens we were, we entered the house. It was dark and extremely cold. We both split up, exploring the enormous house. I went into every room of the house and began to feel extremely guilty because that was considered breaking into someone's house. Also, we were invading the family's privacy. After a few minutes of contemplation, Eli began screaming. I walked over to the screams and found Eli. He was leaving what I believe was Savannah's room. "Why are you screaming?" I asked. He began walking me to the nearest bathroom. He locked the door and started whispering, "There was someone watching me in the closet." I tried reassuring him the person was probably a family member who thought we were breaking into the place. He immediately responded, "Why would he be hiding in a girl's room then?" From what I saw, the room's walls were entirely white, the bed covers were white, and it just overall gave off a girl's room vibe. I became suspicious myself. That was when we began to hear footsteps approach the bathroom door. We tried listening, but the walking seemed to stop. I told Eli to be quiet. Someone started mumbling something outside the door. Shortly after, there was knocking on the door. It started out soft. As it continued, it got louder and louder. It sounded as if someone was trying to break down the door. It started becoming a scene out of a horror movie when the person started screaming. It was a man's scream. I turned around and panically tried to open the window behind us. It was bolted down. I thought we were dead. There was a wrench right next to the toilet, and I used it to destroy the window. We jumped out of it and fell onto the bushes below. I still managed to break my ankle, but we ran out of there fast. Both Eli and I were so confused as to who that person was and what their intentions were. A few days passed, and the family came back. I couldn't take the guilt anymore. I turned myself into the cops and admitted to breaking in. The cops asked me a few questions. Later, they sat me down with my dentist, or the homeowner. I began the conversation with, "Yes, I'm guilty, but the guy hiding in your daughter's closet nearly tried killing me." My dentist showed mercy and didn't press charges. However, he just started to become anxious as he told me, "We never invited anyone to stay at our house." I used to work at this small sleepaway camp as a counselor. It was my first job when I was 17. It was the most fun I could have at any job that age. Plus, it would get me away from my parents' house for a month. I didn't exactly come from an enviable background. So at this camp, there were 5 buildings. The boys' dorms, the girls' dorms, the counselors' dorms, the main hall, which we called the shack, and a small bathroom building. In the shack was the cafeteria, main office, and nurses' quarters, where any kids who suffered any kind of injuries would be brought. Kids' curfews would be 9 o'clock. Curfews only meaning they weren't allowed out of the dorm buildings past that time. I made good friends with this guy named Johnny. He was 3 years older than me, but we got along. It was a Friday night. I remember because I knew it was the start of the weekend. So for fun, Johnny and I went to hang out with these 2 girl counselors, who I'll leave their names out for privacy since I haven't seen them in many years. The 4 of us went out to the woods to smoke. One of the girls were mid-sentence when all we heard was a crunch of leaves in the vicinity. Surely a footstep. All of our heads turned the same way and at the same time. We all heard it. Then, a few seconds later, there was a blinding flash. We didn't understand at first. Unnerved, all of us cut the smoke sesh short and exited the woods at an extremely quick pace. Being back on the campgrounds felt a lot safer immediately, but we became paranoid that we were being watched by one of the camp supervisors, and that the flash was a picture being taken. We would surely get fired if we were caught smoking weed. So in a paranoid panic, we all rushed to our respective dorm buildings. The thing about me when I smoke weed, though, I get extremely paranoid and overthink everything. So as I sit in my bed, it ate away at me, wondering if it was indeed a camera flash, and who took that picture. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to go to the shack and see if any of the supervisors were still working and come clean. Every counselor had a key to the building, so I unlocked the door that led to the cafeteria section, and the door slammed behind me, echoing into the dark, empty building. The only light was coming from that hallway, which I would take to get to the main office, hoping there would be someone still working. You may think I was crazy to be doing this, but I'm not exaggerating when I say I get paranoid, and I really couldn't afford to lose this job over something that wasn't even my idea. However, I would feel out whichever supervisor was on duty and see if they had actually seen what we were doing. As I walked down the hall towards the office, though, I realized quickly that the office light was off. No one was in the building. Just then, I heard the familiar sound of the cafeteria exit door that I had just went through slamming again. Was I seen entering the building? Was I being followed? I hid behind the intersecting hallway wall, peeking my head around, waiting to see who would be walking into the hallway. No one ever did, though. But it took me longer than it should have to notice something peering around the doorway to the cafeteria. It was a person's head. They were doing exactly what I was doing, peering in my direction. When I realized this, I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I ran as fast as I could to the nearest exit, feet stomping on the wood flooring. I ran to the counselor dorm, where only 3 counselors were still chilling in the common area, one of them being Johnny. I told him and only him about what I just witnessed. I didn't know what to think other than I was being followed. I think Johnny could tell I was being a little extra paranoid because I was high, so he told me to just go to my room and lock the door. He made sure to lock the main entrance to the building because I think I scared him too. That night I lay awake for a while, thinking, nervous. So many unanswered questions from one night. The beds in every counselor's room lay right next to a window without blinds, so moonlight would pour in on clear nights, but not on this cloudy night. It was just pure darkness. Until, however, many hours after laying down, a flash filled my room. Lightning? No. There was no thunder, not even rain. I looked at the window, and all I saw was someone's silhouette out there. When they noticed me noticed them, I saw their hand making a waving motion at me. That was the last straw. I left my room screaming for Johnny. He had already gone to bed at this point, so I banged on his door till he opened up. I told him the man who was following me was at my window, so he went to check with me, but figures, he was gone. Johnny asked me if I was still high. I told him not at all, it had been hours. I asked if we should call the cops or something. He said no. He told me to sleep on the floor in his room with my blankets if it made me feel better. Low-key, I think he wanted me to because he was scared just like I was. I didn't understand why on the surface he was pretending to not take this seriously, given that he saw the first flash in the woods with me. I did sleep in his room, though. I didn't want to sleep alone, I was too terrified. The next day, I went to the main office to talk with one of the supervisors. She didn't really know what to do. She didn't call the police, but she gave me permission to call them if something else happened, for the safety of the children. But nothing happened again. Not until the last day on the job for counselors. This was when the kids had already went home, and it was the day we were supposed to pack up and leave. I woke up to 4 pictures taped on my window. One zoomed in on me in the woods that night with Johnny and the 2 girls. A second picture of me sleeping in my bed. A third picture of me entering the shack building that night we smoked, confirming I was being watched and followed. And the 4th picture, a zoom in of my license plate number. I took the photos and showed them to the same supervisor. She kept them for evidence after writing down my whole story, including the smoking weed part. This was many years ago now, and nothing ever happened again, but I was scared to death that the picture of my license plate was some kind of threat, that whoever it was would track me. I still don't know who took those pictures. What you're about to hear is the scariest thing I'd ever experienced. My sister and her husband were going away to Hawaii for a week. So since I'm the second oldest, she asked me to watch my 2-year-old nephew Sean for the duration. 2 was a tricky age for me because Sean was still in diapers at the time, and changing diapers was the last thing I'd ever want to be doing. Still, family is family, and I had to return a favor to them anyway. I was sleeping in the guest bedroom upstairs for the duration, and by the 3rd day I had everything down to a rhythm. Wake up, feed him, do my work in the living room while supervising him as he played, feeding him again, then putting him to bed. My sister has a high-tech baby monitor that connects to a touchscreen tablet. It records sound and video from above Sean's crib and feeds it to the tablet. I would keep that by my side while he slept, no matter where I was. The living room, the bedroom, anywhere. Midday most of the time he'd get sleepy and I'd bring him to his crib to take a nap. By like the 4th day, Sean was taking a nap, so I was in the backyard sitting at my sister's outdoor bar on my laptop. I had the baby monitor placed on the bar, so I was able to easily hear Sean start to laugh at something. I checked the tablet, and I saw him standing in his crib, so I guessed it was time to take him out. I went up to his room and grabbed him to bring him outside in the yard with me, where he drove around in his little electric toy car. For basically the rest of the day, I just watched Sean play with his toys while I would either be doing work on my laptop or just watching something on TV. Shortly after dinner time, I changed him one last time and put him into his crib. An hour or so passed, and there really wasn't much else for me to do. I wasn't interested in anything playing on TV, so I went upstairs to the guest bedroom to put an end to the night. Laying in bed in the dark, the room suddenly lit up from the tablet on the bedside table. I heard Sean laughing again. The tablet would light up if any significant amount of motion or sound was detected. I was comfortable in my position. I didn't really want to move. But when the screen suddenly went dark, yet I could still hear Sean's laughs, I got confused. I picked up the tablet, and all I saw was black. Yet, in a way, it seemed as though the screen was still on. I heard Sean say the word "yeah" as he continued laughing. Something wasn't right. I set the tablet down and began walking to Sean's room, calling his name as I was on my way. I got to his room, and he was standing in his crib. I asked him why he was awake and who he was talking to. He then tried reaching for something atop the crib, but his short arms couldn't reach it. It seemed he was going for the camera for the baby monitor. So I pointed at it and said, "Camera?" And he replied, "Yeah." I picked him up to give him a little lift to see what he was trying to do with the camera. And as I lifted him, he used his little thumb to cover the camera lens. My heart sank as I put the pieces together. The reason the tablet went dark was because it was being covered by someone, but I knew it wasn't Sean based on the fact that he couldn't reach it. "Sean, is someone in here?" I asked him. And in response, he pointed to the closet. I picked him up and ran outside to the neighbor's house, pounding on the door, screaming for help. An elderly woman answered, and she let me call the police with her phone. She was already clearly close with Sean, and because of that, she seemed a lot more comforting. Police showed up and said when they checked the upstairs closet, it was open, but no one was inside. The fact that it was open alone says everything. Someone was in Sean's closet that night. They must have made an escape when I took Sean and ran. The officers told me to stay at someone else's place for the night, and the elderly woman next door allowed us to sleep there. The next few nights after that, I watched Sean at my apartment. My sister and her husband cut the trip short, of course, after hearing the news. I was a 10-year-old diabetic who lived on the second-story floor. My parents lived on the first floor. That night, my dad was watching a scary movie about aliens. The aliens took over the world and were controlling people with their minds. I was unable to sleep in the room that I shared with my sister that night, so instead I slept on the first-story floor with my parents. At that time, my parents were using a baby monitor to make sure I didn't need any help in the middle of the night to take care of my diabetes. Late that night, as my parents and I fell asleep, I heard my mother's voice over the baby monitor. She said, "Amanda, honey, come give me a kiss. I'm going to work." In a confused daze, I looked outside to see it was pitch black. That's weird, I go to myself. Isn't it too late for my mom to be going to work? I rub the sleep out of my eyes as I make my way upstairs. The door to my sister's room cracks open, but my mom isn't in there. My sister is sound asleep on her bed, and the curtain just drifts open. I look around for my mom, but still can't find her. I make my way fast down the stairs and back into my parents' room, where my mom sat up and went, "What are you doing up?" I said, "Didn't you just ask me to come upstairs to give you a kiss goodbye?" She looks at me funny. "No, why would I say that?" she said. I looked at the baby monitor and said, "You didn't hear that?" She looked at me funny and says, "Go back to sleep." I lay on the floor shaking, thinking about what just happened. In my teens and early 20s, I would babysit as my side hustle. I was always really good with toddlers and babies, and usually the parents of the really young ones would pay more. There was this one pair of kids named Lucas and Adriana. Lucas was 2 and Adriana was 7, though Adriana doesn't have much to do with this story, I'll just say that right now. Lucas didn't really speak much, though I was told he had only just turned 2 a few weeks ago at the time. After a long and stressful day of watching the kids, they went to sleep. I would be spending the night at this couple's house watching their kids while they were out in some beach town with friends or something. When the kids finally went to sleep, I had some peace and quiet and time to unwind, as watching the 2 of them was a lot. I lay in the living room watching a movie. The couple actually still had a baby monitor for Lucas's room, and they asked me to keep that in earshot when he went to sleep. I left it on the coffee table in the living room. Eventually, I ended up on a FaceTime call with my friend, and that ate away so much time that by the end of it, it was past 12. I went to sleep after that. Actually, I fell asleep pretty easily. The next thing I remember was the dream. The freaky, disturbing, messed up dream. Everyone knows dreams can be weird and grainy, so I can't describe verbatim what happened in this dream. But the best I can remember, I somehow had lost the baby monitor and Lucas was missing. After searching through this weird dream version of the couple's house, I found the baby monitor under the bed, and on the screen was Lucas's dead body. And upon seeing that, a deep voice kept saying this was your fault. I must have heard it like 3 times before I suddenly woke up. After realizing it was just a dream, I remembered the baby monitor. I left it on the coffee table downstairs, but before going down to get it, I figured I'd check Lucas's room first since it was closer anyway, and I saw he was fast asleep. After that, I went downstairs to get the device and went back up to the room I was staying in. I went back to sleep, but once again, I woke up sometime later. But this time, I woke up to the little monitor device beeping and the red light flashing. I picked it up, and on the screen was Lucas standing up looking directly into the camera. Not smiling or laughing, just looking dead set into the camera, his eyes glowing in the night vision. The way he was looking freaked me out. It was a cause for concern, so I rushed over to his room. But when I got to his room, he was fast asleep, laying on his back. I said his name a few times and lightly shook him, but he didn't wake up. I looked around the room, scared, feeling like there was another presence in there with us. I checked the closet and looked under the crib. No one. I went back to the other bedroom and looked at the monitor again, and it showed Lucas laying flat in his crib. I turned it off for the night, but I didn't sleep as easily after that. To this day, I still don't understand that dream I had, or if it was some kind of warning, and I don't know what exactly I was seeing on that baby monitor screen. I just don't know what to believe was actually real.